My name is Valeria Ruiz, and in those late autumn days in Brooklyn, my life was a well-bound book. Neat pages, no unexpected folds, just the soft rustle of paper as I turned the pages. I was 34 years old, a librarian at the Prospect Heights Public Branch, a red brick building on Eastern Parkway that smelled of old dust and dried ink, with tall shelves leaning like silent guardians over scratched wooden tables, where readers lost themselves in other worlds. My apartment in Clinton Hill was a haven of order. Dark wood floors that creaked under my footsteps, white walls with shelves full of Latin American novels, Cortázar, Borges, that yellowed edition of Rayuela I had inherited from my grandmother, and a window overlooking an interior courtyard where the October rain drummed on the dry leaves like impatient fingers. I had been living alone since I broke up with my college boyfriend, a guy with a hoarse voice who smelled of cheap beer and evaporated promises, and I liked it that way. Mornings of black coffee in a cracked porcelain cup, the steam rising hot against my face as I browsed book catalogs on my laptop. Afternoons of silence broken only by the beeping of the photocopier in the library. Evenings of red wine in a glass that fogged up with the cold of the liquid. The sagging sofa welcoming me with its rough fabric against my jeans as I read until my eyes burned. It wasn't exciting, but it was mine, a space where silence was a comforting veil, not a lurking void. It all started with the persistent feeling of being watched, a subtle weight on the back of my neck that made my skin crawl like the touch of a cold finger in the dark. I attributed it to the stress of the season, overdue catalogs, the incessant rain, the smell of mold rising from the library basement. One Wednesday afternoon, as I sorted returns at the processing desk, the air heavy with the scent of damp paper and old eraser, I felt it for the first time. The fiction aisle was empty, except for the hum of the fluorescent lamp flickering like a tired eye. But there was something else, a silence too heavy, as if the air had stopped, waiting. I turned my head, my neck creaking slightly, and saw nothing. Only shelves lost in shadows, the echo of my own footsteps reverberating on the worn marble. I shook my head, my brown hair brushing my shoulders, and went back to work, my thumb leaving a damp mark on the cover of a poetry book. That night, in the building's elevator, a rusty metal cube that smelled of old urine and pine disinfectant, I felt it again. The mirror reflected my pale face, tired brown eyes under my bangs, but behind me, in the blurry reflection, a fleeting shadow, like a breath fogging up the glass. The elevator stopped at my floor with a sharp ding that pierced the silence, the doors opening with a hydraulic hiss, and I ran out into the hallway, my heart beating an irregular rhythm that echoed in my ears like a distant drum. My door, number 4C, was ajar by a centimeter, the dark wood frame creaking in the breeze from the hallway. I pushed the cold handle against my sweaty palm and entered, the air in the apartment thick with a new smell, cheap cologne, synthetic sandalwood, and something metallic, like rusty coins. That wasn't mine. I checked the locks, intact, the metal cold and smooth. Imaginations, I muttered, my breath coming out in a white cloud in the cool air from the poorly closed window, but the knot in my stomach tightened, a chill running down my spine to the base of my back. The first gift arrived a week later, on a rainy Thursday that lashed the library windows like frantic nails, water dripping down the fogged glass and leaving streaks that looked like tears. I was at the circulation desk, the air heavy with the smell of wet books and stale coffee, sorting returns with hands that trembled slightly from the cold seeping in from the front door. Rayuela by Cortázar, my favorite edition with its worn pages and the smell of old ink that reminded me of afternoons at my grandmother's house, fell open on the table. Between pages 56 and 57, a bookmark. Thick cream-colored paper with a faded gold edge, the kind I use, but this one had a tiny note on the bottom edge, neat and slanted like that of an obsessive calligrapher. You like it when it rains. I can tell by the way you arch your back against the window. The paper crinkled under my fingers, the scent of fresh ink rising like a whisper, my heart beating a rhythm that echoed in my ears like someone else's pulse. "What the hell?" I whispered, the scratched wooden counter cold against my sweaty palms, the hum of the lamp above me intensifying like a swarm. No one in the library checked out Rayuela. It was a dusty classic, forgotten in the Latin American literature section, and the bookmark was identical to mine, the gold edge stained with that coffee spill I'd made months ago. I tucked it into the pocket of my wool vest, the rough fabric scraping my skin, and finished my shift with my hands shaking, the smell of ink sticking in my nose like a bad omen. That night, in the apartment, the rain drumming on the roof like impatient fingers, I took out the marker. The writing seemed to burn into the paper, the black pencil sinking into the fiber like nails into flesh. It shows. What? The knot in my stomach tightened, a chill running down my chest to my belly, making my breath catch. I checked the windows. Closed, the glass fogged by humidity, the inner courtyard dark as a well. I curled up on the sofa, the leather creaking under my weight, the red wine in the glass trembling in my hand, the ruby liquid reflecting the light from the lamp like blood. I slept with the light on, the bulb buzzing like a trapped insect, my sleep fragmented by dreams where gray eyes pierced me from the darkness, cold breath brushing my neck. I didn't think much of it until a week later, on a foggy Tuesday that enveloped Brooklyn like a gray shroud, the air smelling of wet asphalt and smoke from distant chimneys. I was in the building's elevator, the metal cube that creaked with each floor, the fogged mirror reflecting my pale, haggard face, heavy canvas bag slung over my shoulder, the scent of my dry jasmine perfume rising with the movement when the door opened on the first floor. He stepped in, the air changing suddenly. Tall but not imposing, in his 50s, short gray hair combed precisely, gray suit hanging straight on a slim body, dull gray eyes under thin-rimmed glasses that reflected the hallway light like the eyes of a dead fish. "Good afternoon," he said in a soft, modulated voice, a neutral accent that sounded like a public radio announcer, his breath of fresh mint brushing my face in the narrow space. "Eliseo from 1B. He extended his hand, dry, cold skin against mine, short nails scraping my palm slightly. "Valeria from 4C. The elevator rose, the hum of the motor echoing in the silence, his cologne, cheap sandalwood and something metallic, permeating the cube like an invisible veil. We didn't speak anymore, but I felt it. His gaze on my reflection, fixed on the back of my neck, a weight that made the skin on my arms bristle, my heart beating an irregular rhythm that made my chest rise and fall too quickly. I got out on my floor, the hallway smelling of his lingering cologne, a trail that crept into my apartment when I opened the door with trembling hands, the cold doorknob against my sweaty palm. Eliseo began to appear in the library like a polite ghost, always at a table far from the history section, the air heavy with the smell of old books and polished wood, the light from the reading lamp casting long shadows on his angular face. He didn't speak to me. He just read, pages rustling under his thin fingers. But his gray eyes, opaque as storm clouds, followed me when I passed by with the return cart, a weight on the back of my neck that made me stumble over books, the metal of the cart squeaking against the floor like a warning. One Friday afternoon, the sun filtering gray through the tall windows, I saw him from the counter, his head bent over a volume of biographies, but his gaze fixed on me, a touch that ran down my spine to my belly, making my skin tingle. "Good afternoon, Valeria," he said as he returned the book, his voice soft as torn silk, his minty breath brushing my hand as he took the volume, the paper still warm from his fingers. "Eliseo, did you find what you were looking for?" He smiled, his teeth white but slightly crooked. "Yes, stories of orderly lives, like yours." The knot in my stomach tightened, the air in the library thick with the scent of his cologne, a trace that clung to my vest when I went home, the subway smelling of sweat and metal, the hallway of the building dark, my door creaking as it opened. The first letter arrived on a Monday in November, the rain lashing against the library windows like frantic fingernails, water dripping down the fogged glass, leaving streaks that looked like veins. It was in my mailbox in the building, a plain white envelope that crinkled as I opened it in the elevator, the cold metal against my back, the scent of fresh ink rising like a whisper, neat slanted handwriting. Your 3:04 p.m. coffee is too sweet for someone as bitter as you, Valeria, but when it rains, you can tell by the way you arch your back against the window, the water sliding down the glass like tears you don't cry. I watch you, and it's beautiful. The paper trembled in my hand, my heart beating a rhythm that echoed in my ears like someone else's pulse. The elevator stopping with a ding that pierced the silence. I entered the apartment, the air thick with the scent of sandalwood cologne that wasn't mine, the envelope rustling as it fell onto the kitchen table, the red wine in the glass trembling in my hand, the ruby liquid reflecting the light from the lamp like fresh blood. I slept with the light on, the bulb buzzing like an insect, my sleep fragmented by dreams, where gray eyes pierced me, minty breath brushing my ear. I'm watching you. The letters escalated, each one more precise, a knife cutting away layers of my privacy. One described my morning routine. You brush your teeth at 7:12, cold water dripping down your chin, the mirror fogged up by your breath, but you look at yourself as if searching for something lost. Another, my Friday night. The wine slides down your throat like a lover. The sofa creaks under your weight as you touch yourself. Muffled moans against the pillow that smelled of your salty excitement. Panic was a tightening knot, the air in the apartment thick with the smell of his letters, ink sticking to my fingers like dried blood. I changed the locks, the locksmith smelling of tobacco and oil, the new metal cold against my palm, but the weight on the back of my neck wouldn't go away. Eliseo appeared at the corner cafe, the air smelling of burnt espresso and warm croissants that crunched when you bit into them. Sitting at the table by the window, newspaper open, gray eyes fixed on me when I entered, the steam from the latte rising hot against my face. Valeria, what a coincidence, he said, his voice soft, his minty breath brushing my hand as he greeted me, the newspaper rustling under his fingers. Yes, I murmured, the knot in my stomach tightening, the latte going down bitterly in my throat. I read your letter, I said, my voice trembling. He smiled, crooked teeth. They're not letters, they're observations. Your life is an open book, and I am the devoted reader. The coffee grew cold in my hand, the air thick with his cologne, a trace of it sticking to my scarf when I left. The rain lashing my face like someone else's tears. The reorganization came on a foggy Thursday, the air in the apartment thick with the smell of rain seeping through the cracks. My spices in the kitchen, arranged, alphabetically on the wooden shelf, the jar of cumin crunching when I touched it, the scent of dry earth rising like an exposed secret. Nothing was missing, but the order was perfect. Too perfect. The cloves next to the cinnamon, the oregano next to the paprika, as if someone had inhaled every aroma, memorized my chaos. Panic rose like bile, my heart beating at a pace that echoed in my ears, the air thick with a new scent, sandalwood cologne that wasn't mine, permeating the curtains like hot breath. I checked the windows, closed, the glass fogged up with moisture, but the frame creaked when I touched it, as if it had been forced open. That night, sleep was an abyss, dreams where thin hands rearranged my body, fingers brushing my folds. Perfect order, Valeria. The sound came one December night, the snow falling silently outside, the apartment cold as a mausoleum. I woke up with the certainty that someone was breathing in my room, a rhythmic soft breath brushing my ear in the darkness, the air thick with the smell of mint and sandalwood. I sat up, the mattress creaking under my weight, my heart beating like a drum in my chest, the silence broken only by that whisper of breath, deep inhalations that whistled slightly, as if someone were lying next to me, the warmth of another body heating the sheets. I turned on the lamp, the yellow light bathing the room, the air trembling with the hum of the bulb, but the bed was empty, the sheets rumpled only by my movement. On the nightstand, next to a glass of water I didn't remember putting there, was a small black object. A wireless microphone, the size of a coin, the smooth plastic cold against my palm, the tiny cable crackling when I touched it. Panic was a torrent, bile rising, my heart a fist in my throat, the air thick with the smell of my sweat and something else, mint, lingering on the pillow. Eliseo, I whispered, the name coming out like a moan, the microphone in my trembling hand like proof of my total violation. I called the police that same night, my voice breaking on 911, the sticky receiver pressed against my ear, the cold plastic resonating with my pulse. He put a microphone on my nightstand. He listens to me sleep, breathe, moan in the dark. They came with flashlights that cut through the darkness like knives, the smell of coffee from their shift rising from their jackets, checking the microphone with crackling latex gloves. "It's illegal, ma'am. We'll track it down." But Eliseo was a ghost. The cheap microphone, no serial number, the letters with no DNA, the intrusions with no fingerprints. "Keep the doors locked," said the officer, his minty breath brushing my face, an echo that made my skin crawl. I changed the locks again, the locksmith smelling of tobacco, the new metal cold and heavy, but the weight on the back of my neck wouldn't go away. The air in the apartment thick with his cologne, a trace that crept into my dreams, where his breath brushed against my sex, hot and stale, invisible fingers exploring my folds. The horror was not the direct threat of a knife in the dark, but the realization that my walls were made of thin, torn paper, that my orderly private life was a stage lit by his gray gaze, and he was the only spectator in the audience, silently applauding every moan, every sigh, every drop of sweat that dripped down my skin. I no longer felt alone in my house. I felt like I was in a fogged-up glass display case, exposed, my body an object he collected in whispers, my intimacy an open book he read page by page, inhaling my scent like an addict to the rain, licking the drops on my window. And at night, when the rain drummed like fingers, I heard his breathing in the silence, an echo that ran down my spine to my belly, contracting my muscles in a spasm of terror that twisted into something worse, a heat that made me squeeze my thighs together, hating the treacherous pulse between my legs, the whisper of "I'm watching you" echoing in my head like an unwanted orgasm. My name is Clara Bennett, and if you had asked me a year ago how I would describe my life, I would have said it was a blank canvas with touches of soft, tempting color, a canvas where my body unfolded without shame or embarrassment on lonely, feverish nights. 32 years old, a freelance graphic designer in a shared studio in Brooklyn that smelled of burnt coffee and fresh printer ink, with a small but my own apartment in Williamsburg, where the morning sun filtered through the splintered wooden blinds and painted golden stripes on the worn oak floor that creaked under my bare feet like a lover moaning under the weight. The aroma of freshly ground coffee from the neighbor rising up the stairs like a warm and sticky morning greeting, soaking into my skin as I dressed in soft cotton blouses that brushed against my sensitive nipples, hardened by the treacherous rub of the thin fabric, the lace of my black bra lightly scratching the skin of my areolas until they bristled into pink peaks. I'd lived alone since the divorce, an ex who smelled of cheap cologne and broken promises, his fake mint breath lingering on my crumpled sheets like a ghost that still made me tremble on lonely nights. My fingers exploring my own wet, throbbing flesh in the darkness, sliding between my swollen folds with slow, deliberate circles that made me arch my back against the mattress. Muffled, guttural moans escaping from my half-open mouth like an obscene secret. The air in the apartment, thick with the scent of my musky, salty arousal. Hot juices dripping down my inner thighs until they soaked the sheets in a sticky puddle that smelled of salt, guilty desire, and solitary pleasure that evaporated with the dawn. And I liked that. It excited me even in its visceral rawness. Mornings of yoga in the living room, with the window open to the hum of the city. Sweat dripping down my bare back and sliding between my buttocks in hot rivulets that made me involuntarily contract my hips, stretching my body into poses that opened me like an obscene, exposed flower, the muscles in my thighs contracting in waves that reminded me of my own flexibility lost in my failed marriage, the cool air from the East River licking my exposed skin like a lascivious breath, afternoons of deadlines on my MacBook with indie folk playlist playing softly, the low notes vibrating in my chest and down to my belly, making my sex throb with a subtle and treacherous heat against the hard chair seat, my fingers brushing the keyboard with a rhythm that synchronized with the pulse in my folds. Nights of red wine in a thick glass that warmed in my sweaty palm, the ruby liquid sliding down my throat like warm, thick blood. Netflix casting dancing shadows on the walls as the sunken sofa cradled my body, my fingers brushing the rough fabric against my inner thighs in a distracted touch that sometimes became intentional and feverish, exploring the growing wetness between my folds with slow, deliberate circles that made me arch my back against the backrest, the air in the apartment thick with the scent of my musky, salty arousal, low, guttural moans escaping from my half-open mouth like an obscene secret, my swollen, sensitive clitoris rubbing against my thumb until orgasm shook me like a violent internal thunderclap, hot juices dripping down my thighs and soaking the sofa cushion in a sticky puddle that smelled of salt, guilty pleasure, and the loneliness that made it sweeter. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. A space where silence was a comfortable and erotic companion, not a screaming void, where my body felt safe and sovereign. My juices and moans, a secret that evaporated with the dawn, leaving only the scent of rumpled sheets and guilty pleasure that made me smile in the shower, the hot water dripping down my skin like an invisible lover. Until he appeared, the man in the beige coat. I don't know his name. I never did. But his presence seeped into my life like stale cigarette smoke in a closed, poorly ventilated room, permeating everything with a smell that cannot be removed with antibacterial soap or scalding showers that leave the skin red and throbbing like raw, exposed flesh. A stench of putrid obsession and rotten desire that stuck to the skin like dry, cold semen. A scent that made me feel exposed, violated in my most intimate and moist parts, my body no longer mine but a dirty canvas, for his lecherous gaze and ghostly touch, my sex contracting in morbid revulsion every time I remembered his hot, stale breath, a heat that twisted into perverse lust and made me squeeze my thighs together in the darkness, hating the treacherous pulse between my legs. It all started at the supermarket on Fifth Avenue, a crowded Trader Joe's on a Saturday morning in October, the air thick with that cloying smell of fresh bread baked in industrial ovens rising in hot, greasy steam, mingling with the ripe, juicy sweetness of fruit dripping sticky, viscous sap onto the scratched and splintered wooden shelves, the metal cart squeaking under the weight of my purchases, avocados soft to the touch that yielded under my fingers like ripe, juicy flesh, the green skin breaking with a wet sound that made me imagine soft folds, cold, creamy Greek yogurt dripping into the cloth bag with a sucking, obscene sound like saliva in an eager open mouth, a bottle of Cabernet wine promising nights of liquid heat sliding down my throat into my stomach, warming my belly in fiery spirals that spread to my throbbing sex, making my folds wet against the fabric of my cotton thong. I was in the cereal aisle, the floor sticky and slippery from old spills of sugary milk that dried into invisible, crunchy crusts under the soles of my sneakers, the hum of fluorescent lights echoing in my head like an incipient migraine throbbing in my temples with a dull, steady pulse, the smell of processed sugars sticking in my nose like a sweet and cloying bad omen when I saw him for the first time. He was at the other end of the hallway, standing motionless like a half-melted, grotesque wax statue, dressed in a clean, ironed beige coat that hung straight and stiff over his medium-sized body, neither tall nor short, neither fat nor thin. An ordinary man, the kind who gets lost in a crowd like a finger lost in a loose, damp glove, with short brown hair combed to the side with hair gel that glistened greasily and shiny under the flickering lights. Thin-rimmed, cheap metal glasses that reflected the fluorescent lights like compound insect eyes multiplied, capturing fragments of my distorted reflection in their lenses, fogged by the steam of his hot breath. He didn't look directly at me. His eyes, opaque and cloudy brown beneath his glasses, were fixed on the cereal on the box of Cheerios he held in his right hand, thin, pale fingers holding it with a rigidity that made his knuckles whiten like bones exposed beneath taut skin. But I felt his peripheral gaze, a subtle, viscous weight on the back of my neck that made the skin on my arms and chest bristle, my nipples hardening against the thin fabric of my black lace bra, a treacherous, lascivious brush that ran down my spine to the curve of my buttocks, contracting my internal muscles in a spasm of revulsion mixed with an inexplicable morbid heat that moistened my folds against the fabric of my thong. The air between us charged with static electricity that smelled of ozone and uninvited desire. I turned the cart with a metallic squeak that echoed too loudly in the narrow, oppressive hallway. The cold, sticky handle against my sweaty palm now dampened further with cold sweat that smelled of salty fear and growing panic. And I left the hallway with my heart beating a little faster, a dull, damp drum in my chest that made my blouse stick to the skin of my flat belly, the scent of sugary cereal sticking in my nose like a sweet, cloying bad omen that mingled with the fresh sweat under my armpits, a smell of salt and anxiety that rose to my throat like bile. Silly Saturday paranoia, I told myself, paying at the register with the sharp, piercing beep of the card reader echoing like a final, accusatory verdict, the cashier. A guy in his 20s with a scruffy beard and the smell of cheap, stale deodorant, smiling with yellowed, slightly crooked teeth that glowed under the fluorescent lights like fake pearls. "Good morning, ma'am. Reusable bag or crinkly paper?" Outside, the autumn sun warmed my pale, bristly face with a warm touch that contrasted with the cold on the back of my neck, the wind bringing the smell of crispy dry leaves and charred hot dogs from a nearby cart that stuck to my denim jacket like a greasy, permanent stain, and I forgot. Or I tried to, pushing the cart along the sidewalk with wheels that squeaked in the cracks in the pavement, like blunt nails on a chalkboard. The weight of the bags pulling at my arms until I felt the burning tug in my shoulder muscles. The sun warming the back of my neck like a forced, lewd kiss that made me sweat more. The liquid dripping down my back into the crevice between my buttocks, sliding against the fabric of my thong, which was getting wet with the movement. I saw him again 3 days later in McCarran Park on a Sunday afternoon where the air smelled of freshly cut damp grass, mixed with the cloying animal sweetness of wet dogs shaking the water from their coats in cold, salty splashes that splattered the crunchy ground, the sun filtering through the yellow and orange leaves of the maple trees like golden, bloody confetti falling slowly to the ground like drops of diluted blood. I was sitting on my usual bench, a piece of splintered, rough wood that creaked under my weight, as I settled in with a deep sigh, a book open on my lap, Sylvia Plath's The Bell Jar, the old well-thumbed edition with yellowed pages that smelled of aged paper in a dusty public library, the scent of faded ink rising with each turn of the crisp page like dry skin breaking under blunt, anxious nails, the autumn wind ruffling my shoulder-length brown hair in strands that stuck to my sweaty, salty neck, the scent of damp earth and rotten leaves rising from the ground like a whisper of organic decay, a sweet smell of rot mingling with the sweat between my breasts, dripping down my neckline to the edge of my bra. He was on the opposite bench, about 20 meters away, sitting with his legs crossed at a precise, ergonomic angle that made his chinos stretch tight against his thighs, reading a newspaper folded with obsessive care. The New York Times, the pages rustling in the wind like dry skin cracking under blunt nails. The smell of fresh ink and recycled paper seeping into the air like polluted, lascivious breath. His immaculate beige coat contrasting with the chaotic disorder of the park. His posture upright but relaxed, shoulders straight as if the world leaned toward him in lascivious submission. Slender hands holding the newspaper with fingers that did not tremble. Short, clean nails glistening in the sun like fake, shiny pearls. He didn't look up when I walked by to throw a soda can in the trash, the metal resonating with a hollow metallic clang that vibrated in the air like a muffled moan. But I felt it. That peripheral gaze, an invisible, viscous brush against my skin that made me slam the book shut with a sharp, resonant thud that vibrated in my trembling hands, my heart racing like a faulty, overheated engine in my chest, cold sweat dripping down my back under the cotton blouse that clung to my skin like a treacherous second epidermis, the thin fabric clinging to the curve of my breasts and hardening my nipples against the lace of my bra in a lascivious and treacherous touch that ran down my spine to the base, contracting my buttocks in a spasm of revulsion mixed with an inexplicable and morbid heat that moistened my folds against the fabric of my cotton thong, the air between us, charged with static electricity that smelled of ozone and uninvited desire, a pulse that made my sex throb treacherously. I got up from the bench with a creak of wood that sounded too loud and accusatory in the bustling park, the gravel on the path crunching under my Converse sneakers like small bones trampled under heavy, dirty boots, the smell of charred hot dogs now cloying and greasy in my nose, sticking in my throat like a lump of raw, bloody meat that sank down to my belly. I looked back once, the newspaper still open in his motionless hands as if they were claws, but I swore his lips curved into a slight, wicked smile, a tick I didn't see directly but felt on the back of my neck, like a finger brushing my goosebumps, a touch that ran down my spine to the base, contracting my buttocks in a spasm of revulsion, mixed with an inexplicable and morbid heat that spread to my sex, causing my folds to swell and moisten against the fabric of my thong in an involuntary and disgusting pulse, hot juices dripping down my inner thighs like a betrayal of the body. Paranoia began to seep in then, subtle as smoke under the door of a poorly sealed, creaky apartment, a smell you don't identify until it suffocates you in its sticky, suffocating embrace, impregnating the linen curtains and cotton sheets with a persistent stench that gets into the pores of your skin and sticks to your follicles like dry, rancid semen, a scent that made me wake up gasping with my sex moistened in a treacherous pulse. The next day, in the shared office, an industrial loft in Dumbo with exposed brick walls that smelled of fresh paint and underground moisture from the East River rising like salty breath, the hum of air conditioners echoing like a swarm of angry, sweaty bees stinging in the air. I saw him again, this time in front of the building, across Washington Street, leaning against a rusty lamppost that creaked in the wind like a dry, splintered bone, his beige coat a pale, dirty stain against the leaden gray of the city, smoking a cigarette with slow, deliberate movements that seemed choreographed for my gaze, the smoke rising in lazy, gray spirals that dissipated in the salty river wind, the smell of stale tobacco and burnt nicotine reaching me when I went out for lunch, a pungent, penetrating aroma that stuck to my wool jacket like an invisible sticky mark, making my nose wrinkle and my stomach churn with a dull, deep nausea that rose like acid bile. He didn't look directly at me. He exhaled the smoke in my direction with a controlled, prolonged puff, the gray cloud floating toward me like hot, polluted breath brushing my face, stinging my teary eyes, and sticking to my parted lips like a dirty kiss. and he raised the cigarette to his lips with a deliberate, slow gesture, inhaling deeply until her cheeks sank like loose, wrinkled skin, the orange filter glowing like a lecherous, blinking red eye in the dim light of the street, the smoke coming out of her mouth in a cloud that smelled of stale desire and old semen, a breath that ran down my neck to my cleavage, making my nipples harden against the lace. I ran to the deli on the corner, my heart pounding in my chest like a fist against a rotten, splintered wooden door, the tuna sandwich I ordered tasting like wet cardboard and sour mayonnaise in my dry, trembling mouth, cold sweat dripping down my temple and soaking the neck of my blouse until the fabric clung to my collarbone like an unwanted, lewd caress, the crisp bread breaking between my teeth with a sound that echoed like small bones snapping. I ate on a cold, rusty metal bench on the pier, my eyes scanning the street with growing paranoia that made my peripheral vision shake and blur, the smell of polluted river rising from the murky, oily water like a whisper of organic rot and stagnant semen, the wind whipping my hair against my face like insistent, curious fingers exploring my bristling skin, down my neck to the open neckline of my blouse. He wasn't there, but I could feel it, that weight on the back of my neck, like eyes piercing my skin from behind with a dirty, lecherous gaze, a touch that ran down my spine to the hollow of my back, contracting my buttocks in a spasm of revulsion, mixed with a treacherous and morbid heat in my belly, my folds swelling and moistening against the fabric of my cotton thong in an involuntary and disgusting pulse that made me press my thighs against the cold bench, hot juices dripping down my inner thighs like a betrayal of the body I hated but couldn't stop. The escalation was slow and deliberate, like a drip of corrosive, acidic water in a damp, dark limestone cave, each drop carving a deeper well into my sanity, leaving jagged grooves that smelled of salty doubt and cold sweat that clung to my skin like a second layer of lascivious shame, a scent that made me wake up gasping with wet, throbbing sex in a treacherous pulse that spread from my swollen clitoris to my womb. A week later, I found the first photo in my mailbox when I returned from a freelance job at a cafe in Greenpoint. The air smelling of crispy, golden toasted bagels coming out of the oven in clouds of hot, greasy steam, mixing with the smoke from diesel cars that stuck to my throat like black, sticky tar, the red brick building creaking in the wind like an old, aching animal moaning in the dark. The photo was of me, taken from outside my living room window, sitting on the sunken sofa with my legs crossed at a casual, vulnerable angle that exposed the inner curve of my thighs, reading a book with a glass of red wine in my right hand, the light from the floor lamp bathing me in a warm, yellow halo that made my pale, slightly freckled skin glow like exposed, lascivious porcelain, my eyes tired but focused on the yellowed pages, the strand of brown hair falling over my left eye captured in perfect, obscene focus, the reflection of the ruby wine in the glass like diluted and tempting blood dripping down the cut glass, the curve of my exposed neck where my erotic pulse beat, the subtle shadow of my breasts under my unbuttoned blouse that revealed the black lace of my bra, the edge of a pink nipple peeking out at the neckline. It was not a blurry or amateur photo taken with a shaky phone. It was sharp, even professional, the selective focus on my face and the curve of my neck, where my pulse was visible, capturing the slight frown of concentration, the subtle and erotic pulse in my jugular vein beating under the thin, sensitive skin, the scent of fresh printer ink sticking to my fingers when I took it out of the plain white envelope with no return address, the envelope that crinkled like dry, tight skin as I opened it with trembling, blunt nails, the matte paper of the photo, soft against my sweaty palm, which was now dampened further with cold sweat that smelled of salty fear and growing panic, a sticky residue on the back of the photo that clung to my fingers like fresh semen. My stomach churned with a violent, deep nausea that doubled me over against the hallway wall, bile rising up my esophagus like burning corrosive acid scraping the walls of my throat, my heart beating a frantic, panicked rhythm that echoed in my ears like a war drum in a damp, resonant cave. the air in the building hallway thick with the smell of old mail and accumulated dust rising from the metal mailbox compartments, cold and rusty against my palm, which was now clenched into a trembling fist. "Who the hell are you, you degenerate bastard?" I whispered into the empty, heavy air of the hallway, the rusty metal mailbox creaking as it closed, with a sound that vibrated in my bones like a muffled groan. The smell of hot metal lingering in my nostrils like a dirty, lewd kiss. I threw the photo in the apartment trash, the paper rustling as it fell among rancid, damp orange peels, but the smell of fresh ink lingered, seeping into my skin like an invisible, burning tattoo. A reminder that someone had been there, had seen my silhouette against the light of the lamp, had captured my vulnerability in a click that smelled of betrayal and lewd desire. The flash of the phone, burning my image into pixels that now haunted me, making my nipples harden in revulsion as I remembered the focus on my cleavage, the edge of my pink nipple exposed like an unwanted invitation. The calls began that same week, always at 3:17 a.m. The landline in the living room, an old model with a coiled black cord that smelled of yellowed plastic and years of dust accumulated in the cracks, the cord scraping the wooden table with each vibration, resounding in the absolute darkness of the apartment like a muffled, shrill scream that pierced the silence like a blunt, serrated knife into soft, sensitive flesh, jolting me awake in a violent start that left my heart in my throat. Cold sweat soaking the cotton sheets that clung to my naked, bristling skin like a damp, sticky shroud. The air in the room heavy and stale, with the smell of my own salty fear and the dampness of the night seeping through the cracks in the window like a lewd breath. I would wake up with my pulse hammering in my temples like a fist against a rotten, splintered wooden door, the air thick and heavy with the scent of my residual arousal from an interrupted erotic dream. Dry, sticky juices between my thighs that smelled of salt and guilty desire, my clitoris still swollen, brushing against the sheets in a treacherous pulse. The sunken mattress creaking under my weight as I sat up with trembling, damp legs. The handset hanging like a dead, heavy snake from the coiled cord that brushed my bare arm like an insistent, lascivious finger, goosebumps rising in waves. I answered with a trembling, hoarse voice, the cold, smooth plastic against my ear bristling at the contact. "Hello? Who the fuck is this? Say something, damn it." The coiled cord scraping my goosebumps like a live, vibrating wire. Silence on the other end, but not empty or innocent. Slow, rhythmic breathing, deep, wheezing inhalations that whistled softly on the line like someone smoking a cigarette in the darkness of a poorly ventilated, unfamiliar room. The exhaled smoke seeping through the wire like hot, polluted breath brushing against my inner ear and down my neck, making the back of my neck bristle with a chill that spread to my breasts, hardening my nipples against the sheets into pink, sensitive peaks. It lasted for torturous, eternal minutes, the silence heavy with that oppressive, lascivious weight, breathing subtly quickening in peaks that coincided with my own treacherous, racing pulse, until it turned into low, guttural moans. A masculine, obscene purr that smelled of frantic, solitary masturbation in the darkness of his dirty, messy room. The sound of fabric rustling rhythmically as if being touched furiously across the line. A broken, moist breath accelerating into soft, animalistic gasps. "Clara, your scent. Your skin so soft, so moist. I imagine my cock in your mouth, moaning around me. My name coming out as a hoarse, obscene moan that froze the blood in my veins, causing my thighs to contract involuntarily under the sheets. A treacherous and morbid heat in my belly spreading to my sex, my folds swelling and moistening against the fabric of my cotton thong in an involuntary and disgusting pulse that made me clench my teeth to keep from moaning in response. My fingers digging into the sheets until my nails broke. Warm, salty blood dripping onto the fabric that smelled of my fear and my perverse excitement. They hung with a sharp, definitive click that echoed in my skull like a muffled gunshot in a padded, damp room, the receiver returning to its place with a dull thud that vibrated in my trembling, sweaty hand. I lay awake until the gray and dull dawn, the digital clock on the nightstand glowing red in the darkness like an accusing and lecherous eye blinking maliciously, the scent of cold sweat and salty fear permeating the sheets that clung to my goose-bumped skin and damp thighs, the wind outside lashing the windows with a low, animalistic howl that sounded like muffled laughter and obscene moans, raindrops drumming on the glass like impatient, curious fingers that wanted to come in and touch my exposed skin, exploring my curves with cold touches. I blocked the number with fingers trembling on the phone keypad, the hot, sticky plastic against my sweaty palm, but it always came back. The same obsessive sexual pattern, 3 and 17, the ringtone piercing my fragile sleep like blunt nails on a blackboard. The silence on the other end now tinged with a darker, more explicit hue, breaths quickening into low, guttural moans that smelled of lonely, frantic masturbation in the darkness of her dirty, messy room, the sound of fabric rustling rhythmically as if being touched furiously across the line, ragged, wet breath turning into soft, animalistic gasps. Clara, I imagine my cock in your tight pussy, moaning as I fill you with hot cum, your belly swelling with my seed. My name coming out as a hoarse, obscene moan that made me close my eyes in deep nausea, my thighs contracting involuntarily under the sheets, a treacherous and morbid heat in my belly, spreading to my sex, my folds swelling and moistening against the fabric of my thong in an involuntary and disgusting pulse that made me hate my own body, fear twisting into something worse, a perverted desire born of horror that made me clench my teeth so as not to moan in response, my fingers digging into the sheets until my nails broke, warm, salty blood dripping onto the fabric that smelled of my fear and my perverse arousal, hot juices dripping down my thighs until they soaked the mattress in a pool that smelled of salt, betrayal, and guilty pleasure. The gifts came like corrosive, burning drops on a cracked old ceiling, each one more intimate and violating, a touch that smelled of subtle, deliberate desecration, a brush that stuck to the skin like dry, cold semen, a scent that seeped into the pores and clung to the follicles like a permanent mark of dirty, lascivious desire. The first was the shoes. I came home after a day of meetings in Manhattan, the F-subway rattling underground, with the smell of stale sweat and hot metal sticking to my wool jacket like a greasy, sweaty second skin, the apartment dark except for the gibbous moonlight seeping through the half-open blinds like silvery viscous blood dripping onto the oak floor, the air inside thick with the scent of my own vanilla perfume, lingering from the morning, mixed with the sweat of the day dripping between my breasts and down my flat belly to the elastic of my thong, moistening the fabric against my sensitive, bristling folds. My shoes, a pair of soft, supple black leather boots that creaked with a sensual, erotic sound when I walked, the leather smelling of sweet beeswax in my feet after a long day, the salty sweat soaked into the inner lining where my toes fit warmly, were in the entryway, lined up against the wall like soldiers in obscene ritualistic formation, but not as I had left them that morning in a casual, disorderly pile by the door, arranged differently, the boots placed with their toes pointing toward the exit as if prepared for a quick escape, or worse, for a lascivious and possessive welcome, heels together at a precise 45-degree angle pointing directly at my bedroom, the leather now gleaming with a layer of fresh wax that was not mine, a greasy, oily sheen reflecting the moonlight, like wet, lustful eyes, the inner lining slightly exposed, with the boots half open like an invitation. As I touched them, my fingers sank into the soft, warm leather that still retained the heat of another body, but I felt a sticky, warm residue on the inner sole, like the imprint of a male foot, sweaty and heavy, with a smell of stale tobacco and sandalwood cologne that rose to my nostrils like hot, polluted breath on the back of my neck, making my skin to bristle from my arms to my chest, my nipples hardening against the thin fabric of my black lace bra in a treacherous and lascivious touch that ran down my spine to the curve of my buttocks, contracting my internal muscles in a spasm of revulsion mixed with an inexplicable and morbid heat that moistened my folds against the fabric of my cotton thong, hot juices dripping down my inner thighs like a betrayal of the body. My stomach churned with a violent and deep nausea that doubled me over against the hallway wall, bile rising up my esophagus like burning, corrosive acid scraping the walls of my throat, my heart beating a frantic, panicked rhythm that echoed in my ears like a war drum in a damp, resonant cave. The air in the apartment hallway, thick with a new and invasive scent, masculine cologne, heavy sandalwood, and something animalistic, like clean sweat mixed with fresh, salty semen, that didn't come from me or the city outside, but from within, seeping from the soles of my boots like a dirty, lewd secret, a residue that smelled of hurried masturbation in the dark, semen dripping onto the inner lining as he imagined my feet inside, my toes curling around his member in an involuntary embrace. I checked the door locks, intact, the cold, rusty metal against my trembling palm growing wetter with cold sweat, the click of the handle resonating like a negative, accusatory verdict. But that night, I slept with the kitchen light on, the bulb buzzing like an insect trapped in hot, sticky amber, the scent of sandalwood cologne lingering on the linen curtains that swayed with the breeze from the half-open window like a lewd whisper, a touch that crept into my dreams like fingers exploring my exposed skin, trailing down my belly to my damp folds, a dream where his breath brushed my sex, hot and stale, causing me to wake up gasping with the sheets soaked in sweat and treacherous juices, my swollen clitoris rubbing against the fabric in a pulse that made me moan aloud, hating the pleasure that was born of fear. Another day, the glove, the left one of my favorite pair, soft, thick gray wool gloves that smelled like damp wool and the subway in winter, the rough, warm fabric brushing against my palms during cold walks across the Brooklyn Bridge, where the wind whipped my skirt against my inner thighs, causing the fabric to stick to my folds, disappeared from my black leather bag during lunch at a cafe in Soho, the aroma of creamy tomato soup and crusty bread sticking in my nose as I chatted with a client about deadlines, the steam from the plate rising in hot spirals that fogged up my glasses and made me sweat under my blouse, the heat trickling down my neckline to my breasts. I found it in the mailbox 2 days later, just the left glove, folded with obsessive care like origami made of flesh and dirty desire. The gray fabric now stiff and starched with a rigidity that was not mine, the smell of clean wool mixed with something more intimate and morbid, a trace of stale tobacco and male sweat that rose to my nostrils like hot, contaminated breath in my mouth, the inside of the glove damp and sticky to the touch as if it had been used for something dirty and frantic, solitary and desperate masturbation perhaps, the thick salty residue sticking to my fingers when I opened it with trembling nails, a smell of dry, stale semen that made me vomit in the hallway, bitter, acidic bile splattering the linoleum that creaked under my trembling knees, the glove falling to the floor with a wet plop that echoed like a muffled, obscene moan. My stomach contracted in violent spasms, my heart beating a panicked rhythm that echoed in my ears like a pulsing drum of flesh, the air in the hallway thick with the stench of vomit and that sticky residue that wouldn't go away, permeating my leather bag that now smelled of violated wool and desecrated desire, a reminder that someone had touched what was mine, had used it for their dirty, obscene pleasure, wrapping their erect, veiny member in the gray fabric while moaning my name in the darkness, hot, thick semen, dripping onto the inner lining where my fingers would fit, the glove absorbing its essence like a lewd sponge. I threw it in the building's trash, the glove crinkling as it fell among crumpled damp papers, but the smell lingered, sticking to my bag like a mark of ownership, a trace that made me squeeze my thighs together as I walked, the treacherous heat in my sex reminding me that fear twisted into perverse lust, my folds moistening with each step as if the glove were still inside me. The book was next, an old well-thumbed edition of The Great Gatsby that smelled of aged paper and dusty public libraries, with yellowed pages that crinkled as I turned them like dry skin breaking under blunt, eager nails, left on my white pine bookshelf, with a page marked in the chapter about the opulent, decadent party, the passage where Gatsby watches Daisy from afar in the crowd of sweaty, panting bodies, his heart beating with a rhythm of pure, consuming obsession, sweat dripping down his back as he imagines her skin against his, her hot breath in his mouth, her moisture enveloping him in a wet, tight embrace. The page had a note stuck to it, a faded, crumpled yellow post-it, with neat, tiny handwriting, black ink, that smelled of cheap ballpoint pen and nervous sweat. I see you, Clara, like he does you, craving every curve of your heavy breasts, every fold of your wet pink pussy, every drop of sweat dripping between your buttocks and down your thighs. Your skin must smell of vanilla and untouched desire, of hot juices when you touch yourself, thinking of my hard cock inside you, moaning my name in the dark. The paper of the post-it note was rough and sticky against my trembling fingers, the smell of fresh ink mingling with something sweeter and more morbid, like chewed gum and old dried semen, and when I touched it, my fingers became damp with a sticky, warm residue that wasn't mine, a trace of frantic masturbation that clung to my skin like a dirty, explicit confession, causing my stomach to churn with a deep burning nausea that doubled me over, bile rising in my throat like corrosive acid scraping the walls. My heart beat a frantic, panicked rhythm in my chest, echoing in my ears like a war drum in a damp, resonant cave, the air in the apartment thick and stale with a new, invasive scent, heavy sandalwood cologne seeping in from the half-open window like hot, lewd breath on the back of my neck, the wind carrying invisible particles that stuck to my hair and blouse, as if someone had been there, breathing my air, smelling the vanilla scent of the body lotion I put on after my hot shower. The same scent I now imagined being inhaled by other noses in the darkness, his tongue licking the air where my sex had been exposed, hot and wet, his fingers imagining my folds, his cock hardening with the memory. Paranoia became a heavy, suffocating blanket, a smell that couldn't be removed with antibacterial soap or scalding showers that left my skin red and throbbing like raw, exposed flesh, a stench of stale fear and treacherous excitement that permeated the linen curtains and cotton sheets, waking me in the night with my heart racing and my sex moistened in a treacherous pulse that spread from my swollen clitoris to my womb, juices dripping down my thighs in dreams where his breath brushed against me. I checked the locks 3 times a night, the cold, rusty metal against my sweaty palm getting wetter with each click, the sound echoing like a negative, lewd verdict in the silence of the apartment, the scent of hot metal lingering in my nostrils like a dirty kiss. I slept with the phone in my right hand, the warm, sticky plastic against my skin, the glow of the screen illuminating my pale, haggard face in the darkness, the buzz of fake notifications echoing like obscene whispers. I called the police for the first time after the photo, my voice shaky and hoarse on 911, the sticky receiver against my bristling ear, the plastic warm from use. It's harassment, officer. Photos of me in my mailbox, taken from my window, my face, my body, naked in the shower, my pussy exposed and dripping, my nipples hard under the water. Everything. The voice on the other end, tired and nasal, smelling of stale coffee and double shifts. No direct threats or physical harm, ma'am. There's not much we can do legally. Change your locks, install security cameras, keep a log of incidents. If he enters your property, call us. I installed cameras, digital eyes blinking red in the corners of the living room and kitchen, the low, constant hum like a mechanical whisper that never stopped, the wiring crackling as I hid them behind books and plants that smelled of dry earth and subtle rot, the red eye glowing like an accusing clitoris. The climax came like a dull, lascivious thunderclap in the oppressive stillness of a November night, the rain lashing the windows like frantic, desperate nails scratching the glass with a scraping sound, the wind howling outside like a wounded, rabid animal moaning in the darkness with guttural gasps, fat, cold drops drumming on the roof like impatient, curious fingers wanting to come in and explore my exposed skin, slide down my curves. I had gone out to dinner with a friend from college, the restaurant in Dumbo smelling of fresh, salty seafood dripping onto hot, slippery porcelain plates, tart, cool white wine sliding down my throat like a river of temporary but fleeting relief, forced laughter that tasted like wet cardboard in my dry, trembling mouth, the smoke from e-cigarettes on the terrace clinging to my jacket like a gray, suffocating veil that smelled of nicotine and repressed desire. I returned at midnight, the F subway rattling underground, with the smell of stale urine and hot metal clinging to my exposed, goosebump skin, the apartment dark except for the gibbous moonlight seeping through the half-open blinds like silvery, viscous blood dripping onto the oak floor, the air inside thick with the scent of my own vanilla perfume lingering from the morning, mixed with the sweat of the day dripping between my breasts and down my flat belly to the elastic of my thong, moistening the fabric against my sensitive, bristling folds that throbbed with the memory of wine. I collapsed onto the bed without undressing, the sunken mattress welcoming me like a treacherous and lascivious embrace that clung to my back. Sleep coming in, broken and feverish fragments. Dreams where brown eyes pierced me from the darkness. Hot breath brushing my ear with low, obscene moans that smelled of dirty desire and fresh semen. My body arching on the bed with a treacherous heat that made me moan loudly. Hot juices dripping down my thighs until they soaked the sheets in a puddle that smelled of salt and guilty pleasure born of fear. I checked the cameras the next day, my heart beating a rhythm of growing lascivious panic as the video loaded on my laptop, the glow of the screen illuminating my pale, haggard face in the kitchen, the stale coffee aroma from the machine dripping into the air like a reminder of false, broken normality, the steam rising hot against my face. The 3:17 a.m. video, the living room in spectral green, grainy night vision, the sunken sofa empty and dark as an open, damp grave, the wall clock ticking with a sound that pierced the digital silence like an obscene, erotic pulse until the front door opened without audible sound, an almost inaudible click that the microphone captured like a stifled, lascivious sigh. He entered, the man in the beige coat, moving with a supernatural and deliberate calm that made the skin crawl even through the cold screen, the coat rustling softly like starched tissue paper with each slow, measured step, the smell of stale tobacco and sandalwood seeping through my imagination, like a palpable, lascivious ghost, permeating the air of the apartment that now seemed contaminated with its dirty, sticky essence. He sat down on my sofa, the leather creaking under his medium weight with a sharp, prolonged sound that resonated in the speakers like a guttural, animalistic moan, and picked up my favorite coffee cup, the white ceramic one with a chipped blue handle, which smelled of old coffee, and my lips when I drank from it, the inside rim stained with faded pink lipstick and dried saliva from my mouth, the residue of my morning kisses. He lifted it to his nose with thin, pale fingers that trembled slightly with feverish, contained excitement, inhaling deeply and slowly, brown eyes closed in perverted and obsessive ecstasy, full, chapped lips brushing the rim where I put my mouth every morning, an indirect, dirty kiss that froze the blood in my veins until I felt the cold spread to my extremities, a phantom touch running down my spine to the hollow of my back, contracting my buttocks in a spasm of revulsion mixed with a treacherous and morbid heat that moistened my folds against the kitchen chair, hot juices dripping down my inner thighs. He stood there, smelling, the clock striking 3:17 with a digital beep that pierced the silence, inhaling my residual scent. Bitter, roasted coffee, sweet, waxy lipstick, the slight sweat of my morning skin dripping between my breasts and down my belly, until his free hand moved down to his crotch with a deliberate motion, the coat rustling with the rub of fabric, the sound of the zipper coming down echoing in the audio like an obscene and erotic whisper, his member freed in the green darkness, thick and veiny, his hand wrapping around it in a rhythmic and frantic motion that made his breathing quicken into wet, guttural gasps, the sofa creaking with each violent pump, hot, thick semen dripping onto the floor with a silent sucking plop, the imagined smell rising through the screen like a lewd, contaminated breath, the white, viscous puddle glistening in the night vision like an obscene offering. He got up afterward, the leather groaning under his weight, leaving the cup on the side table with a soft, definitive thud that echoed like a final obscene kiss, and left, the door closing with a click that resonated in my soul like a lewd, eternal verdict. The beige coat fluttering like a cloak of dirty, contaminated fog that left a trail of his essence in the air. I called the police that same morning, my voice broken and hoarse on 911. The sticky receiver pressed against my bristling ear, the plastic hot from use. "He's in my house, officer." At 3:17 a.m., sitting on my couch, sniffing my cup as if it smelled like me, masturbating in my space, leaving his semen on the floor like a dirty mark, his hard cock dripping in my living room. 2 uniformed officers arrived, heavy boots echoing on the floor like hammers against raw flesh, the smell of coffee from the deli, and shift sweat rising from their blue jackets like a gray veil. They took the video with a laptop that smelled of new plastic and greasy fingerprints, but he was a digital ghost. No fingerprints on the dust on the coffee table, no DNA on the cup, just the smell of sandalwood lingering on the ceramic like a dry, lewd kiss, a dry, crunchy puddle on the floor that smelled of rancid salt and rotten desire, semen hardened like a white crust that flaked off when touched. He disappeared after that. The man in the beige coat, evaporating into the Brooklyn crowd like smoke in the salty, polluted wind. But the terror remained, a constant, obscene whisper in the night, the smell of stale tobacco on my pillow that made me wake up gasping with wet, throbbing sex, photos in my mailbox every week, naked in the shower, taken from the half-open window, hot water dripping down my exposed, bristling skin, the flash capturing every curve of my heavy, sagging breasts, pink nipples hardened by the water and the cold, every dark, curly pubic hair, the foamy soap sliding down my belly to the triangle between my thighs, my swollen pink folds opened by the pressure of the water, with a note scribbled in black ink that smelled like cheap ballpoint pen. "Beautiful in your vulnerability, Clara. Your pussy glistens like fresh semen underwater dripping for me. I see you sweating. I see you touching yourself in the dark, your clitoris swollen under your fingers, moaning my name without knowing it. Soon I will fuck you until you scream." Abuse in stolen photos, my intimacy violated in dirty, explicit pixels, my body an object of his lecherous lens, the flash burning my skin in retrospect like a hot iron, making my nipples harden in revulsion at the sight of the printed images, the matte paper crackling under my trembling fingers, my sex contracting in a spasm of fear that twisted into perverse lust. Calls with heavy, ragged breathing, low guttural moans that smelled of solitary, frantic masturbation in the darkness of his dirty, messy room, the sound of fabric rustling rhythmically as if being touched furiously across the line, ragged wet breath turning into soft, animalistic gasps. "Clara, I imagine my cock in your tight pussy, moaning as I fill you with hot cum, your belly swelling with my seed, your mouth sucking my balls until I explode in your throat. My name coming out as a hoarse, obscene moan that made me close my eyes in deep nausea, my thighs contracting involuntarily under the sheets, a treacherous and morbid heat in my belly spreading to my sex, my folds swelling and moistening against the fabric of my thong in an involuntary and disgusting pulse that made me hate my own body. The fear twisting into something worse, a perverted desire born of horror that made me clench my teeth so as not to moan in response, my fingers digging into the sheets until my nails broke, warm, salty blood dripping onto the fabric that smelled of my fear and my perverse arousal, hot juices dripping down my thighs until they soaked the mattress in a pool that smelled of salt, betrayal, and guilty pleasure that made me touch myself in the dark, hating every touch. Morbid gifts that arrived like packages with no return address, wrapped in crisp brown paper that smelled of dusty warehouses and repressed desire. My worn underwear, stolen from the laundry basket, a black lace thong with yellowish stains from my dried arousal and sticky juices, dry, sticky semen impregnated in the lace fabric that stuck to my fingers when I touched it, the smell of rancid salt and rotten desire rising to my nostrils like hot breath in my mouth, the fabric damp to the touch as if still warm from its frenzied use, an attached note scribbled in black ink that smelled of cheap ballpoint pen. Your scent mixed with mine, Clara, as it should be. Touch it. Feel how it calls to you, my semen on your pussy through the fabric, soon direct, moaning as I fill you until you drip. The terror is that my sanctuary is no longer mine, invaded by his dirty gaze and invisible touch, the beige coat lurking in every shadow on the street, whispering, I see you, I smell you, I fuck you in my mind, in the wind that brushes my goosebump skin, a touch that travels down my body to my most intimate parts, causing my sex to contract in a spasm of fear and something worse. A perverted desire born of horror, my body betraying me in the darkness with moans that sound like his. My name is Sarah Ellis, and in those late September days in Brooklyn, my life was an orderly ritual, like the pages of a book that no one else ever took off the shelf. Predictable, comfortable, with the soft crackle of the spine as it opened. I was 30 years old, a freelance interior designer in a Bed-Stuy co-working space that smelled of burnt coffee and plotter ink, with a one-bedroom apartment in a 3-story brownstone on Lafayette Avenue, where the afternoon sun filtered through cracked vinyl blinds and painted slanted stripes on the dark wood floor that creaked under my barefoot steps. I'd been living alone since I broke up with my college boyfriend, a guy with a husky voice who smelled of cheap beer and evaporated promises, his breath lingering on my pillows for weeks. And I liked it that way. Mornings of black coffee in a cracked porcelain mug, the steam rising hot against my face as I checked emails on my laptop, the keyboard sticky with sweat from my fingers. Afternoons of virtual meetings with clients who asked for minimalist but warm spaces, my voice echoing hollowly in the microphone. Evenings of rosé wine in recycled glass glasses that fogged up with the cold of the liquid, the sunken sofa welcoming me with its rough fabric against my jeans as I binged on Netflix series, the hum of the ceiling fan stirring the stagnant air that smelled of my dry jasmine perfume, and the humidity of the East River seeping through the cracks in the window. It wasn't exciting, but it was mine, a space where silence was a comforting veil, not an emptiness lurking in the corners. It all started with the noise of moving, a Friday in September, when the Brooklyn air was thick with that sticky late summer heat that clings to your skin like stale sweat, the sun filtering gray through low clouds like a dirty veil. I was walking down the stairs of the building, the brownstone creaking with every step, the wrought iron handrail cold against my palm, canvas bag slung across my chest with my laptop inside, the weight pulling at my shoulder until it hurt, the scent of my vanilla deodorant rising with the movement, when I heard the sound of boxes creaking in the first-floor hallway. He was there, kneeling in front of the door to 1B, the apartment next to mine on the second floor, carrying a cardboard box marked Books in crooked, shaky black letters, the cardboard damp from the sweat of his hands, the smell of dust and old paper wafting from the open flaps like dusty breath. He was of average height, neither tall nor short, with a slim but not frail body, dressed in a light blue cotton shirt that clung to his chest from the effort, beige chinos that rustled with a dry sound as he moved, short brown hair styled with gel that gleamed greasily in the dim light of the hallway. He looked up when I entered, ordinary brown eyes under straight, bushy eyebrows, a broad, polite smile revealing white, even teeth with a slight gap between the incisors, fresh, minty breath that reached me with the movement of the stagnant air. "Hi, neighbor. I'm Liam, moving in today. Can you give me a hand with this box? It weighs a ton, and the hallway is like an oven." His voice was soft, with a neutral Midwestern accent that sounded like a public radio announcer, his fresh mint breath brushing my face in the narrow space, a scent that mingled with the clean sweat under his shirt. I hesitated for a second, my bag pulling at my shoulder like a heavy anchor, but I smiled, that automatic smile of a polite citizen that activates with strangers, and helped him, my fingers brushing his as I took the box, warm, dry skin against mine, a touch that lasted a second too long, his short nails scraping my palm slightly with a feel that felt like a subtle scratch. "Thank you, Sarah, right? I saw you leave this morning, with that bag that looks like it contains the whole world." The hallway now smelled of his sweat mixed with mint, a scent that stuck to my cotton blouse like an invisible, sticky mark, the cardboard box crunching under my arms as I carried it to his living room. "Yes, I'm Sarah. Welcome to the neighborhood. It's quiet here except for the subway rumbling at night." I set the box down in his living room, the hardwood floor creaking under my slippers, the air inside smelling of new cardboard and something else, a subtle sandalwood cologne rising from his skin like a veil. "If you need anything, coffee, recommendations for bars that don't stink of stale beer, let me know. I'm next door 2B. She smiled again, her teeth gleaming with a gap that now struck me as a charming flaw, and left the empty hallway smelling of her absence, a void that felt heavy and expectant, as if the air had retained her shape. At first, it was casual, like brushes in a crowd that you don't notice until they accumulate on your skin like subtle bruises. 2 days later, we met in the building's elevator, a rusty metal cube that smelled of old urine and stale pine disinfectant, the foggy mirror reflecting my face with slight dark circles from a night of deadlines. Me coming down from a meeting with my hair tousled by the wind from the street, the scent of coffee latte sticking to my breath like a sweet secret. Him coming up with a bag of groceries that crinkled with every movement, red apples shining in the paper bag like accusing eyes. "Sarah, what a coincidence," he said, his soft voice echoing in the narrow claustrophobic cube, the elevator rattling between floors, with a hum that vibrated in my chest like someone else's pulse. "Yes, it's a small world in Brooklyn," I replied, the air thick with his sandalwood cologne mingling with my jasmine perfume, a scent that clung to the metal walls like an invisible veil. The heat of his body inches from mine, making the space feel smaller, the brush of his elbow against my arm, an accident that lasted a second too long. We talked about nothing, the weather that smelled of imminent rain, the deli on the corner that served hot bagels with creamy cheese that melted in your mouth. But his brown eyes lingered on my face a second too long, drifting down to my exposed neck where my pulse beat visibly beneath the skin, a visual touch that made the hair on my arms stand on end, my heart beating in irregular rhythm that made my chest rise and fall too quickly, sweat dripping down my back under my blouse. I stepped out onto my floor, the hallway smelling of his cologne lingering like a trail, a whisper that crept into my apartment when I opened the door with hands that trembled slightly, the cold doorknob against my sweaty palm. A week later, at the gym down the block, a CrossFit box that smelled of stale sweat and rubber mats burned by the rubbing of feet. I saw him again, the air thick with that smell of masculine exertion that clung to the skin like a greasy second layer. He was on the rowing machine, His gray t-shirt clinging to his chest, with sweat dripping down his neck, muscles contracting with each pull of the handle, the air thick with the hum of weights and the collective panting of those training. "Sarah, you here. Morning routine to clear your mind as usual." His voice cut through the hum of the machines like a knife, sweat dripping from his temple glistening under the harsh LED lights, the scent of his clean effort, salt and testosterone, reaching me as I passed by to grab a towel, a warmth running down my spine and pooling in my belly. "Yes, cardio so I don't go crazy with deadlines," I said, my heart racing not from exercise but from his presence, the brush of his arm against mine as I held out the towel a second too long, damp skin against mine. We talked between sets, him remembering my bag from the other day in the elevator, me laughing nervously with a sound that came out forced, the metal of the bar cold against my sweaty palms that were now getting wetter, the scent of his sweat mixing with mine in the shared air, a heat that made me press my thighs against the bar. I left with my body trembling, the gym hallway smelling of his essence, a trail I followed to my apartment without meaning to, the elevator creaking between floors like a shared secret. The harassment became personal then, like a whisper in my ear that turns into hot, moist breath on the back of my neck, a touch that sticks to my skin like someone else's sweat. One afternoon of light rain soaking the streets of Brooklyn, water dripping from the eaves like restrained tears, I saw her apartment from my window, the curtains half open, a warm yellow glow filtering through like an exposed secret. She had the same hand-knitted blanket I bought on Etsy last year, gray with frayed edges that smelled of damp wool and nights of solitary reading, placed on her sofa identical to mine in shape and worn fabric. The weave crackling in my mind as I imagined it under her weight, enveloping it like stolen skin. The next day, the same. Blue glass vase on the windowsill, the one I bought at a craft fair in Dumbo, its surface smooth and cold against my palm as I filled it with fresh flowers, now reflecting his silhouette as he passed through the room, the glass fogged by the breath of his presence. The paintings, abstract landscapes in shades of blue and gray that I hung last month, smelling of fresh acrylic paint and turpentine that stung my nose, now on his wall visible from my window, the light wooden frame creaking in my memory as if I had touched it. Coincidences, I told myself, my heart beating a rhythm of doubt that echoed in my ears like someone else's pulse, the air in the apartment thick with the smell of rain and salty paranoia rising from my sweaty skin, but the knot in my stomach tightened, a chill running down my chest to my belly, making my breath catch, the glass of water in my hand trembling, the liquid sloshing against the glass like an irregular heartbeat. Then the phrases, not coincidental, but echoes coming out of his mouth with my exact intonation, a subtle theft that made my skin crawl. In the corner cafe, the air smelling of burnt espresso and warm croissants that crunched when bitten into. She served me my latte with a smile that lasted a second too long, the steam rising hot against my misted face. A perfect day for a book, isn't it, Sarah? Something about shadows that follow the light, like in The Secret History. It was my phrase, the one I said to my friend on the phone that morning, the steam from the latte rising like an exposed secret, her voice modulated with my slight pause before shadows, brown eyes lingering on my parted lips, minty breath brushing my hand as I took the cup. Yes, something like that, I murmured, the lump in my throat tightening, the latte sliding bitterly down my esophagus, the heat spreading to my chest like a slow fire. Days later, in the elevator, the metal cube creaking between floors. You're confused, Sarah. That's not how it happened in the movie. The ending is sweet, not tragic, like the wine you drink on Fridays. My conversation with my therapist last week, words coming out of her mouth with my slight Ohio accent, the pause on tragic identical, the air thick with her sandalwood cologne that smelled like possession, a trace that stuck to my jeans when I left, the hallway of the building dark and silent, my door creaking open with a sound that echoed like a shared secret. The diary was the breaking point. A Friday in November when the rain lashed against the apartment windows like frantic, desperate nails. Water dripping down the fogged-up glass, leaving streaks that looked like pulsing veins. The air thick with the smell of mold rising from the floor below. I left it on the kitchen table that morning, bound in soft black leather that smelled of a craft workshop, and my own skin, pages filled with my hurried scribbles. Today I felt lonely. The wine helped, the heat running down my belly, like a ghost lover who fills me without touching me. The blue pen rolling to the edge with a metallic sound. Returning from a meeting with a client in Manhattan, the subway smelling of stale sweat and hot metal sticking to my jacket. The apartment dark except for the gray afternoon light filtering through the blinds. The diary was open to the same page, but the entries from the last few weeks were not mine. Today, Sarah touched herself in the shower, hot water dripping down her heavy breasts, hard nipples brushing against the stream, muffled moans against the tile echoing in my head as I masturbated thinking about her wet, pink pussy, my fingers imagining its folds. Soon I'll make her mine. I'll fuck her against that wall until she screams my name. My exact handwriting, fresh blue ink that smelled like cheap ballpoint pen, details of my morning masturbation, the stream of water hitting my swollen clitoris, juices mixing with the water dripping down my thighs, orgasm arching me against the cold tile, stolen from my most intimate privacy, words that came from my pen but not from my mind. Panic was a violent torrent, bile rising in my throat like corrosive acid, my heart beating a rhythm of terror that echoed in my ears like a war drum. The air thick with the smell of my vomit splattered across the kitchen table, the diary rustling as it fell to the floor, pages open like an exposed wound. Liam, I whispered, the name coming out like a muffled moan, the apartment spinning in a dizzying nausea, the hardwood floor creaking beneath my trembling knees. Desperate, I burst into his apartment that same night, the master key to the building, stolen from the doorman's locker for $50 in a moment of panic, the heavy metal in my pocket, squeaking in the lock with a sound that echoed like a broken secret, the hallway smelling of his sandalwood cologne that suffocated me like hot breath on the back of my neck, my heart beating a rhythm of terror that clouded my peripheral vision. The door opened with a soft, definitive click, the air inside thick with the smell of stale tobacco and something else. Fresh semen and my stolen jasmine perfume that had seeped into the curtains in his living room. The room was a distorted mirror of mine, my gray hand-knitted blanket with frayed fringes on the sofa, the fabric rustling in my mind as I imagined it under his naked weight, enveloping him as he masturbated smelling my scent, my blue glass vase on the windowsill, the smooth surface now stained with greasy fingerprints that glistened in the moonlight, my abstract paintings in shades of blue and gray on the wall, the light wooden frame creaking when touched, the fresh acrylic paint now impregnated with his sweat. But the back room, a door ajar, red light seeping like coagulated blood into the dark hallway, the air thick with a smell of dampness, and stale desire rising from the floor. I entered, my heart a fist in my chest, hammering against my ribs, the wooden floor creaking under my slippers like small bones, the air changing to a stench of tobacco and old semen that stung my nostrils. Photos of me covered the walls of the small claustrophobic room, printed on matte paper that crinkled when touched. Naked in the shower, hot water dripping down my heavy, sagging breasts, the flash capturing my pink nipples hardened by the stream and the cold. Every dark, curly pubic hair, my swollen pink folds opened by the pressure of the water sliding down my belly to the triangle between my thighs. In bed, vibrator buzzing against my swollen clitoris, my hand between my thighs with fingers sunk into my wet folds, juices glistening in the lamplight, my face contorted in ecstasy with my mouth half open moaning. In the gym, sweat dripping down my exposed back, yoga shorts clinging to my round buttocks, camel toe visible between my legs, the flash capturing the outline of my sex under the fabric. stolen objects lined up on creaking metal shelves, my used underwear, black lace thong with yellowish stains from my dried arousal, and sticky juices, dried sticky semen impregnated in the fabric that stuck to my fingers when I touched it, the smell of rancid salt and rotten desire rising like hot breath. My toothbrush, bristles with traces of my saliva and dried mint paste, a lock of my brown hair tied with red thread that smelled of dried blood, recordings on a laptop open on the unmade bed, sheets smelling of his sweat and recent masturbation, hardened semen in yellow stains, my phone conversations with my therapist. I touch myself, thinking of no one, just the emptiness, my fingers in my pussy until I explode. Played on loop, with my voice moaning in the dark, the audio crackling with interference that sounded like gasps. But worst of all, a notebook open on the bed, rumpled sheets smelling of his fresh semen and my stolen perfume, pages filled with his handwriting imitating mine with obsessive precision, a story of our perfect relationship. Today, Sarah saw me at the supermarket. Her pussy got wet when she felt my gaze fixed on her ass, her yoga shorts clinging to her buttocks. Soon, I'll fuck her on her couch, her body arching beneath mine, her breasts bouncing as my cock fills her with hot semen, moaning my name until her throat breaks. The ending is sweet, Sarah. I'll tie you to the bed with my beige coat covering your mouth, my cock in your throat until you choke on my cum, and we'll be one forever. Your belly swollen with my seed. Your pussy, mine forever. I screamed, the sound choked in my throat like a broken moan, my heart beating a rhythm of terror that made me vomit bitter bile on the floor that creaked beneath my knees, the air thick with the smell of his cum and my salty fear, treacherous juices dripping down my thighs in a morbid pulse. I ran, the door closing with a click that echoed like a final, obscene kiss, the hallway smelling of my panic and his cologne. I called the police, my voice breaking. He stole everything, photos of my dripping pussy, my diary with fantasies of fucking me, semen on my underwear. They came, they raided, they arrested him. Liam Harper, the perfect neighbor, his apartment a sanctuary of my violated life, his hard cock in photos that made me vomit again. But the terror remained, a whisper in the night, the smell of sandalwood on my pillow, my sex contracting in dreams, where his member fills me, a perverted desire born of horror, my body betraying me forever with moans that sound like his. Chicago, late fall, dead leaves crunched under the tires of yellow taxis, and the wind from Lake Michigan cut like a rusty knife. Martha Klein walked through the underground parking garage of the office building in the Loop, where she worked as an editor for an architecture magazine. It was 8:45 p.m., and the fluorescent light flickered like an irregular pulse. The air smelled of rancid oil and stale cigarette smoke. It wasn't the first time she'd felt that. That pressure on the back of her neck, as if someone were breathing too close. She adjusted her red scarf, the only note of color on her gray coat, and quickened her pace toward her silver Honda Civic. The echo of her heels bounced off the concrete walls, and for a second she swore she heard another pair of shoes. She stopped walking. Silence. Only the distant drip of a pipe. She took out her keys and pressed the unlock button. The lights flashed. She opened the door, slid inside, and turned the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, but before she put it in reverse, she saw it. In the rearview mirror, a silhouette at the end of the hallway. Tall, hunched, motionless. A shadow in a black hoodie, hands in the pockets of a long coat. It wasn't moving, but Martha felt it watching her. Her heart pounded in her chest. She stepped on the gas and sped away, the tires scraping the curb. Outside, the cold hit her, but sweat beaded on her forehead. That night, in her apartment in Wicker Park, a narrow loft overlooking an alley, she couldn't sleep. She curled up under the sheets, phone in hand, ready to dial 911. But what would she say? I feel like someone is watching me. The Chicago police had worse things to deal with than the paranoia of a 32-year-old yuppie. The next day, at the office, the scratch appeared, not on her car, but on the door of her cubicle. A fine line, as if made with a sharp fingernail, ran across the plywood frame. No one mentioned it. Martha wiped it away with a damp cloth, but the groove remained, a silent reminder. The week passed in a fog of caffeine and deadlines. Martha edited articles about sustainable skyscrapers, but her mind wandered to dark corners. On Wednesday, on the L train to downtown, the Red Line, crowded at midday, she sat by the window. The car rattled along the elevated tracks, passing faded graffiti and crumbling buildings. She looked at her reflection in the dirty glass. Sunken eyes, tight lips. Then, movement. Out of the corner of her eye, a figure at the end of the car. Black hood, face hidden. She sat up straight, turned her head. Nothing. Just a group of tourists with backpacks. But when the train stopped at Grand Station, he, or what looked like him, got up. Heavy, deliberate steps, stopping just as the beep announced the opening of the doors. Martha held her breath. The man passed 2 seats away, brushing the air near her shoulder. He smelled of damp earth and something metallic like fresh blood. She got off at her station, but the panic followed her to the office. That day she found the bird, small, a sparrow, stiff on the hood of her car in the garage at work. Wings folded in a broken gesture, glassy eyes fixed on the concrete sky. There was no blood, just a loose feather that the wind blew under the vehicle. Martha picked it up with a tissue and threw it in a nearby trash can. Her hands shook on the steering wheel on the way home. She called her friend Lena that night, sitting on the couch with a glass of red wine she didn't touch. "It's like he knows where I am all the time," she said, her voice low so as not to alert the thin walls. Lena, a therapist at a mental health center on the south side, listened with that professional calm. "It could be post-pandemic stress, Martha, or a resentful ex. Have you checked the locks?" Martha hung up and walked to the door. The chain was on, but the deadbolt felt loose. That night, she dreamed of footsteps in the hallway outside, stopping just outside her door. On Friday, the elevator. The office building had one of those old ones with dented metal panels and a constant hum. Martha entered the 12th floor alone and pressed the button for the basement. The doors closed with a hydraulic sigh. She descended floor by floor, the counter flashing. 10. 9. On the 4th, they opened. He entered. Hood down, broad back blocking the light. He didn't turn around, just positioned himself with his back to her, filling the space like a living wall. The elevator descended. Silence, except for his heavy, rhythmic breathing. Martha pressed herself against the opposite corner, her heart pounding in her ears. In the basement, the doors opened onto the empty garage. He didn't move. Then the whisper. White t-shirt with lace at the neck, gray cotton pants, nothing underneath. The words seeped out like smoke, brushing her ear. Martha gasped, air catching in her throat. He walked out without looking back, melting into the shadows of the hallway. She ran to her car, hot tears streaming down her cheeks. How did he know? Those were the clothes she had slept in the night before, the ones she had left on the chair next to the bed. She sped to the surface, the exhaust roaring into the void. Weekends in Chicago could be either a balm or hell. Martha opted for the former. Brunch with Lena at a cafe in Logan Square, warm croissants and frothy lattes. But even there, in the daylight filtered through frosted glass, she felt the eyes. A man at the back table, newspaper raised, but the corner of the paper trembled as if it contained a smile. "You're paranoid," Lena said, spreading jam on her bread. "Let's talk about therapy, or dating. That guy on Tinder, the history professor." Martha forced a laugh. No, just normalcy. But normalcy cracked that afternoon, at the Jewel Osco supermarket in her neighborhood. She was pushing the cart down the cereal aisle, selecting unflavored oatmeal, when she heard the cart behind her. Wheels squeaking, stopping when she did. She turned. No one. Just endless shelves of colorful boxes. At the checkout, paying with her card, the cashier, a 19-year-old boy with a nose piercing, handed her the receipt. "Good morning, Mrs. Klein." She froze. How did he know her name? It's on the card, he muttered, shrugging, but the chill remained. Back home, unloading bags in the kitchen, she found the note, taped under the doormat, a crumpled piece of paper with a single word scribbled in black ink. Tomorrow. Unsigned, but the smell, damp earth, permeated the air. She called the police this time. The sergeant at the 14th District Station was polite but skeptical. Ma'am, we get hundreds of these. Change your locks, install a camera. Physical evidence. Martha described the bird, the scratch, the whisper. He took notes, promised patrols, but deep down she knew it was her word against nothing. That night, the push, the River North movie theater parking lot, after a solo movie, a romantic comedy that didn't make her laugh. She left at noon on Saturday, the low sun tinging the car's orange. Her Honda was at the back, under a broken streetlight. Footsteps behind her, quick. A shoulder slammed her against the driver's door, the cold metal biting into her hip. Hot breath on the back of her neck, stale tobacco and mint, a stench that clung to her skin. Run faster next time, the voice growled, hoarse as gravel. Martha screamed, but he was already running away, his silhouette dissolving into the shadows of the pillars. She collapsed against the car, bruises blooming on her arm. The pain was real, tactile, but the escape was smoke. She called an Uber. She didn't drive. At home, she showered 3 times, the water boiling, but the smell lingered. The days became a maze of precautions. Martha bought pepper spray at a hardware store on Milwaukee Avenue, carrying it in her coat pocket. She changed the locks, 2 new deadbolts, a reinforced chain. She installed a Ring camera at the door, synced to her phone. Lena convinced her to go to therapy, virtual sessions twice a week, talking about her divorce 2 years ago, about the loneliness that gnawed at the edges of her life. But the stalker didn't stop. On Monday, on the train again, this time the Blue Line to O'Hare, she saw him reflected in the window, sitting 3 rows back, hood down, hands clasped. When the train slowed on a curve, his gaze met hers in the glass. Dark, empty eyes, like bottomless wells. Martha pressed the emergency button, and the driver announced a stop. She got off at the next station and ran up the stairs to the street where traffic roared like a river. At the office, a package was waiting for her at reception. No sender, wrapped in brown paper. Inside, a red scarf, identical to hers, but stained with something sticky, reddish. She threw it in the trash without touching it. But the receptionist, an older man with a gray mustache, looked at her, strangely. Problems, Klein. On Wednesday, the mail. Not the electronic kind, but the physical kind in her mailbox in the lobby. An unstamped letter slipped through the slot. Inside, a Polaroid photo. Her sleeping on her couch last week, wearing the white lace t-shirt. The light from the floor lamp illuminated her relaxed face. Martha threw up in the sink, the acid burning her throat. Lena visited her that night, bringing pizza from Giordano's and a bottle of Cabernet. Sitting on the kitchen floor with the door closed and the lights on, they talked. "It's escalating," Lena said, her voice soft. "You need to move out temporarily. My couch is yours." But Martha refused. "I won't run away. This is my home." That night, they slept together, the queen-size mattress creaking under their combined weight. At 3 a.m., a knock on the alley window, glass rattling. Martha jumped up, spray in hand. Nothing. Just the wind whipping a loose branch. Tension built like snow on the windowsills. Martha stopped going to the gym at dawn, opting for daytime walks in Washington Park. But even there, the shadows of the oak trees seemed to lengthen toward her. At work, she became distant, editing furiously, ignoring invitations to happy hours at dive bars on Division Street. Saturday was the breaking point. Another scratch on her car, this time on the windshield. A deep X, like a cattle brand. The police returned, took photos, promised fingerprints. Nothing. Martha looked at the underground parking lot, the flashing lights, the pillars covered in faded graffiti. And she saw him. In the back, the silhouette, motionless, waiting. Something broke inside her. Not fear, but rage. "Enough," she whispered. Instead of running away, she took a step forward. He turned, hood down, and began walking toward the darkest corner, where the security cameras couldn't reach. A service alley blocked by dumpsters. Martha followed him, spray in one hand, phone in the other, recording. The echo of their footsteps was in sync. Heel, boot, heel, boot. The air thickened, heavy with the smell of earth and metal. He stopped in the darkness, his back against the damp wall. Martha stood 3 meters away, her voice firm. "What do you want? Why me?" Silence. Then, slow hands reaching up to the hood. He took it off. He wasn't a monster. Not some deformed creature from a horror movie. Just a man. In his 40s, short, unkempt brown hair, dull gray eyes, square jaw with a thin scar on his left cheek. He wore worn jeans and a cracked leather jacket. He smiled, but it was an empty smile, like a blank canvas. "I wanted you to know," he said, his voice calm, almost conversational. He took something out of his pocket, a silver key, serrated, glinting in the distant light. "It's your house key. I changed it yesterday while you were sleeping. The Yale lock, easy to pick with a lockpick. I just wanted you to know before I decide to use it." Martha took a step back. The spray, raised, but the man didn't advance. He just held out the key in his open palm like an offering. It's not the act that's scary. It's knowing it can happen. Whenever you want. Wherever you want. The phone vibrated in her hand, the recording capturing everything. He turned, walking toward the exit, his silhouette dissolving into the light. Martha collapsed against the wall, the key falling to the floor with a clink. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She just breathed, the weight of the impending promise crushing her. The days that followed were a blur of police and coroner's reports. The recording was key. Detective Ruiz, a tough woman with a Puerto Rican accent, identified the man as Daniel Voss, a plumber fired from a local company with a history of harassment in a failed divorce. He was arrested that same night at a cheap motel in Cicero with a suitcase full of photos of her. Martha on the train, at the office, sleeping. At the police station, Voss didn't deny anything. "I was just playing," he said, shrugging. "I wanted her to feel what it's like to be invisible until you're not." Martha watched him through the one-way glass, her empty smile now twisted into a grimace. She felt no relief, only a hollow emptiness. She changed the locks again, temporarily moving in with Lena in a larger apartment in Ukrainian Village. Intensive therapy, sleepless nights where the echo of footsteps woke her. But the fear didn't go away. It mutated. Now, in brightly lit parking lots on daytime trains, she looked for shadows. Not out of terror, but out of habit. Months later, in the spring, Martha published an article in the magazine, Urban Shadows, The Architecture of Fear. It detailed not buildings, but the spaces that humans fear. Endless corridors, blind corners. Voss was serving his sentence in Stateville, but his key, that arbitrary promise, remained in Martha's mind, a reminder that the real stalker is not the shadow, but the certainty that it will return. My name is Emily Carter, and I am 28 years old. I live in Portland, Oregon, in a 2-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a red brick building built in the 1950s. I work as a freelance graphic designer, which means I spend most of my days alone at home, in front of the computer. I used to love that solitude. It was my refuge, my creative space. Now it is my prison. It all started 6 months ago, on my 28th birthday. It was a sunny Friday in April. I remember the detail because it was the last day I felt truly safe. I came home after lunch with friends, walked up the stairs to my apartment, and found something at my door. A package, rectangular, wrapped in matte black paper with a perfect red satin bow. My name was written on top in elegant handwriting, to Emily. I thought it was from my friends, or maybe from my sister in Seattle. I went into the apartment, left my keys in the bowl by the door, and opened the package on the sofa. Inside was a black velvet box. I opened it. A necklace, delicate silver with an eye-shaped pendant. Beautiful, actually, but also unsettling. An eye, staring at me. There was no card, no note, no clue as to who had sent it. I called my friends. None of them had sent it. My sister. No. My mother. No. Maybe a secret admirer, suggested my best friend Rachel playfully. Someone from the gym, or that cute guy from the cafe where you work on Tuesdays. I worked part-time at a local cafe to supplement my income. There were several regular customers who were nice, but none of them seemed like the type of person who would send expensive jewelry without identifying themselves. I put the necklace in a drawer, uncomfortable but not alarming, yet. 2 days later, on Sunday, I found another package. Same black wrapping, same red bow. This time it contained a book, Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, my favorite novel. I'd read it 6 times, but how did they know? I'd never posted about it on social media. I rarely talked about books with strangers. Inside the book was a bookmark, a photo, of me, at the gym, running on the treadmill, taken from an angle that suggested the photographer was on the machine behind me. My stomach clenched. Someone had photographed me without my knowledge. I turned the photo over. On the back, in the same elegant handwriting, "You are beautiful when you run. Your concentration is admirable, always watching." Fear set in then. Real, visceral fear. I called the police. An officer came, took my statement, photographed the book and the image. "Miss Carter, technically this isn't illegal yet. An unwanted gift and a photo in a public space. But document everything. If it continues, call us back." Still, it wasn't illegal yet. The officer left with his notes, and I was left alone in my apartment, which suddenly felt less safe. The gifts continued. Every 2 or 3 days, something new at my door. Flowers, always black roses, which I had to Google and discovered, meant death of old ways or dark beginnings. A bottle of my favorite wine, a dark Cabernet brand that I only bought at a specific wine shop 4 miles away. How did he know? A silk scarf with the exact pattern of one I had seen in a store but decided not to buy 2 weeks earlier. Had he followed me while shopping? Each gift came with a note. The notes became more personal, more intimate, more disturbing. "Your laughter is like bells. I heard it yesterday when you were talking to your friend at the cafe. You make my world make sense. That blue dress you wore on Tuesday fits you perfectly. The color enhances your eyes. You should wear it more often. You shouldn't walk alone at night. There are dangerous people out there. Thank goodness I'm always around to make sure you get home safely." That last one made my blood run cold. Someone was following me home, at night. Without my knowledge, I started looking over my shoulder constantly. At the gym, I scanned faces, looking for anyone who was staring at me for too long. At the cafe, I checked who was coming and going. Walking home from the bus stop, my keys ready in my hand as a makeshift weapon, headphones off so I could hear footsteps behind me. But I never saw anyone suspicious. I never caught anyone watching me. Whoever it was a ghost, invisible but omnipresent. I installed an extra lock on my door. I bought blackout curtains for every window. I stopped posting on social media. I deleted Facebook, made my Instagram private, removed all location tags from my photos. I changed my routine, different routes to the coffee shop, varying gym times, shopping at new stores. Nothing worked. The gifts continued. The notes became more possessive. "Why are you changing your patterns? Are you trying to hide from me? You can't. I will always find you. We are connected, destined. I saw you bought new curtains. Smart. But I already know your space. Every corner. Every detail. Your curtains won't change that." He knew my space. Had he been inside my apartment? I obsessively checked every lock. I installed a cheap security camera pointing at my door. I checked the video every night. It only showed me coming and going, and occasionally neighbors passing by. No one leaving packages. They appeared during hours when I was out, in blind spots of the camera, or maybe he knew exactly when it wasn't recording. Then the call started. My phone would ring at odd hours. 2 a.m., 4 a.m., I would answer, stupidly in hindsight, and hear breathing. Just that. Slow, measured breathing. Sometimes it would last 30 seconds before they hung up. Other times, minutes. Once, 5 full minutes of someone breathing while I held the phone to my ear, paralyzed, unable to hang up because part of me needed to know if they would say something. Finally, they did. Emily. My name, whispered in a soft, modulated male voice. Unrecognizable. Not threatening in tone, but absolutely terrifying in context. Emily, I know you're awake. I can see your light. I looked toward my window. The curtains were closed, but the light from my reading lamp was on. I jumped out of bed, turned off the light, and crouched behind my bed in the dark with the phone still pressed to my ear. Ah, you got scared. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I just wanted to hear your voice. Why won't you talk to me, Emily? I've been so patient, so attentive. I give you gifts, I protect you, and you ignore me. I hung up. I called the police again. This time, with the number that had called me, they were able to trace a VoIP app. Impossible to locate. The detective assigned to my case, because now I had an official case, a file number, advised me to change my number. I did. I thought that would solve something. 2 days later, my new phone rang. The same unknown number. How did he get my new number? Only my close family and Rachel had it. Emily, changing your number was rude, but I understand. You're scared. It's natural, but don't be afraid of me. I would never hurt you. I love you. Don't you understand? Everything I do is out of love. Love. The word made me nauseous. This wasn't love. It was obsession, sickness. Please stop calling me, I managed to say, my voice shaking. What you're doing is illegal. I have a restraining order. I lied. I didn't have a restraining order because I didn't know who he was to order him away. Legal orders are just paper, Emily. They mean nothing against real feelings. And what I feel for you is more real than anything in your superficial life. His tone hardened. Your friends, your job, those boring video calls with clients who don't even appreciate your talent. It's all empty. But I see you, the real you, the artist, the dreamer, the lonely woman who craves genuine connection. I am that connection. I don't know you, but I know you. I've spent months studying you. I know you bite your lower lip when you're concentrating, that you hum Fleetwood Mac when you cook, that you cry watching sad movies even when you're alone. I know your soul, Emily, and you will know mine. Soon. She hung up. This time, I didn't call the police. I knew what they would say. Document everything, stay vigilant, install more security. Helpful but useless advice against a ghost. I started sleeping with a kitchen knife under my pillow. I left the lights on all night. I checked the locks every hour. My sleep was fragmented into 30-minute blocks, interrupted by panic, getting up to check windows, doors, shadows. Exhaustion was killing me. I lost weight. Permanent dark circles under my eyes. My clients noticed my work was slipping. "Are you okay, Emily?" one asked during a video call. "You look sick." I couldn't explain. How could I explain that a stranger had consumed my life? Rachel suggested I move in with her temporarily. I considered it. But what if I put her in danger? What if he followed me and started obsessing over her too? I couldn't risk it. Then the visible nighttime surveillance began. Before, he had been an invisible ghost. Now he wanted me to know he was there. It started with shadows. Looking out my kitchen window, which faced the alley behind the building, I saw a figure standing under the streetlight, just standing there, looking up at my window. I couldn't make out facial features from the 3rd floor in the dark, but the posture was unmistakable. He was watching me. I slammed the curtains shut. My phone rang immediately. "Don't close the curtains, Emily. I like watching you. You're beautiful when you cook." The way you move your hands, how you taste the food straight from the pot. It's intimate. Let me share in those moments. Go away. Get away from my building, I yelled into the phone. Or what? Will you call the police? By the time they arrive, I'll be gone. As always, I'm Smoke, Emily. Intangible but always present. He hung up. I called the police anyway. I ran down the stairs while talking to the 911 operator. I went out into the alley. Empty. No figures. No shadows. Just the hum of the streetlight and the distant sound of traffic. The officers arrived and searched the area. Nothing. Miss Carter, we understand your distress, but without physical evidence or the ability to identify the suspect, our hands are tied. They said it with genuine compassion, but it didn't help. Night after night, the figure appeared. Always in the same place, standing under the light, watching, waiting, sometimes for hours. I stopped looking out that window. I hung a thick sheet over the curtain for double blocking. My phone. The sheet is ugly, Emily. It ruins the aesthetics of your beautiful apartment. Take it down. How did he know? Did he have binoculars? A telescope? I lived on the 3rd floor. The building across the street was commercial, closed at night. Where was he watching from in such detail? Paranoia became my permanent state. I stopped working efficiently. I lost 2 important clients. Rachel was worried. Emily, this is destroying you. You need to do something drastic. Move. Change cities, something. She was right. But moving meant expenses I couldn't afford after losing clients. And what guarantee did I have that he wouldn't follow me? He seemed omniscient. Then things got worse. Much worse. I came home one night after forcing myself to go out to buy groceries, something that now required all my willpower. I opened my door. Everything seemed normal at first. Then I noticed my laptop was at a different angle on the desk. Subtle, but I was obsessive about the placement of objects now. I checked the security camera at the door. Nothing. No one had entered through the front door. I checked every room with the kitchen knife in my hand. Empty. Windows closed. Door lock showed no signs of tampering. But someone had been here. I could feel it. The air was different. It smelled different. A trace of men's cologne, barely perceptible. I went to my bedroom. On my bed, on my pillow, something that wasn't there this morning. A photo. Of me, sleeping, in this bed, in this room, taken from the foot of the bed. He had been in my apartment while I slept, standing over me, photographing me. How many times, how many nights had I been vulnerable and unconscious with this psychopath watching me? The terror was absolute. My legs gave way. I collapsed on the floor, holding the photo with trembling hands. On the back. You're even more beautiful when you sleep. So peaceful. So trusting. You purr softly. It's adorable. I want to sleep next to you every night. Soon, my love. Soon. I called Rachel, hysterical. She came immediately. I stayed with her that night and for the next 2 weeks. But I knew I couldn't live on her couch permanently. I needed to solve this. The detective assigned to my case, Detective Morrison, came to my apartment. He inspected everything. Miss Carter, there are no signs of forced entry. Any chance someone has keys? Landlord, ex-boyfriend, co-worker. We went through every possibility. My landlord, Mr. Huang, 72 years old, completely innocent. I hadn't had a boyfriend in 2 years, and that ex now lived in California. My co-workers at the cafe were all women or teenagers. None of them had access to my keys. Then someone made copies, Morrison concluded. We'll change all the locks. We'll install a commercial-grade security lock, and I'm going to assign more frequent night patrols to your street. They did. New lock. Impossible to force without industrial tools. I felt marginally safer. For 3 days, there were no gifts, no calls, no sightings. I thought maybe, finally, he had given up. Then the biggest package yet arrived. A cardboard box the size of a shoebox, same black wrapping. At my door again, despite the new lock that was supposed to keep him out of the building. I called Morrison before opening it. He came with his partner. They photographed and documented everything. Then they opened the box with gloves. Inside, my personal belongings. Underwear that had disappeared from the laundry basket weeks ago. I assumed it had been lost in the building's laundry room. A hairbrush with several of my hairs still tangled in it. My old toothbrush that I had thrown away the week before, a used tissue, a crumpled pharmacy receipt with my name on it, and photos, dozens of photos, of me in every conceivable state, sleeping, showering. The bathroom window was frosted glass, but apparently not frosted enough. Changing clothes, eating, crying on my couch, talking on the phone, working on my laptop. Some photos were from months ago, judging by my longer hair. He had been watching me since before the first gift, maybe half a year or more. "This is escalation," Morrison said gravely. He's no longer satisfied with observation. He's collecting trophies. This typically precedes direct physical action. "What kind of action?" I asked, though I knew the answer. "Confrontation. Attempting direct contact. Or," he didn't finish, but I understood. "Or kidnapping. Or assault. Or murder." At the bottom of the box was an envelope. Morrison opened it. A letter, multiple pages written in that familiar, elegant handwriting. "My dear Emily, I know you're scared. I know you don't understand. But soon it will all make sense. I have waited patiently. I have been respectful. I have shown my devotion with gifts, with attention, with constant protection. But you reject me. You call the police. You change your locks. You flee to your friend's house. This hurts me, Emily. It hurts me deeply. Don't you see that we are meant to be? The universe connected us. That first day I saw you, 9 months ago, at the bookstore downtown. You were browsing the art section. You were wearing that green sweater that makes your eyes sparkle. Your hair was loose over your shoulders. I knew instantly that it was you, the woman I had been searching for my whole life. Since then, I have devoted every moment to getting to know you, to understanding you, to becoming the perfect man for you. I have studied your tastes, your patterns, your fears and dreams. I know your soul better than you do. But my patience has limits. You've had enough time to get used to the idea of us. I can no longer wait in the shadows. I need to touch you, hold you, love you properly. Soon, very soon, we will be together. Not as observer and observed, but as lovers, as soulmates finally united. Don't resist when the time comes. It will make everything easier. For both of us. Yours forever, your eternal lover. It wasn't signed with a name. Of course not. Morrison arranged for police protection, an officer stationed outside my building at night. Regular patrols. He suggested I consider a shelter for victims of stalking. I refused. Shelters are for victims of domestic violence with known abusers. My abuser was a ghost. He could follow me anywhere. That night, with the officer outside, I felt relatively safe, until my phone rang. 1:30 a.m. The cop in the patrol car outside is Officer Johnson. He's drinking coffee. He has a weight problem. He should take care of his health. But I guess that makes him slower. Easier to evade if I needed to. Low chuckle. Not that I need to. I'm being polite by staying away while he's there. But the time will come when there will be no police. You can't have protection 24 hours a day forever. And when that time comes, I'll be waiting. What do you want? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. You, Emily. It's always been you, only you. I want you to be mine, completely, forever. That will never happen, never. I'd rather die. Silence, long. Finally, don't say that. Don't talk about death. This is about love. Eternal love. But if you refuse, if you really insist on rejecting me, even after all my effort, my devotion, then maybe you're right. Maybe death is preferable to a life, apart. But you wouldn't die alone, my love. We would die together. Romeo and Juliet. A tragic but romantic ending, eternally united. He hung up. Threat of murder-suicide. Morrison took it seriously, but without knowing who he was, how to stop him was a mystery. Miss Carter, I need you to think. Anyone. Someone who has shown excessive interest. Someone who frequently appears in your usual haunts. A customer at the cafe. Someone from the gym. A neighbor. Think, I thought. For days, I searched my memory of the last few months. Faces at the cafe, forgotten conversations, mundane interactions. And then I remembered. The man at the cafe. He came 3 times a week. He always ordered the same thing. Black Americano. No sugar. He sat in the corner, laptop open but rarely looking at it. He looked at me. When I caught his eye, he would smile briefly and return to his screen. I had assumed he was shy, or just friendly. What was he like? I tried to remember details. Average height, average build. Dark brown hair, neatly cut, always dressed casually but cleanly. Jeans, sweater, glasses sometimes. Age, 30-something maybe. Nothing memorable. Nothing that raised any red flags. Except that he was there, constantly. And he looked at me. I told Morrison. Do you know his name? Did he pay by card? We checked the cafe's transaction records for the last few months. Nothing definitive. Many customers paid in cash. But we found 3 card transactions from someone named D. Foster, at times that coincided with when I was working. A vague name, but it was something. Morrison investigated. David Foster, Daniel Foster, several in the Portland area, none with a criminal record. One, Daniel Foster, 36 years old, lived just 2 miles from my apartment. IT consultant, remote work. His LinkedIn profile showed someone who vaguely matched my memory. Dark hair, glasses, professional smile. Morrison visited his address, apartment in a different complex. Daniel Foster opened the door, cooperative. He let Morrison inspect. Normal apartment. No altar dedicated to me, no walls covered with photos, no obvious evidence. Daniel insisted he was a regular customer at the cafe, but had never stalked anyone. Morrison couldn't arrest him without evidence, but Morrison had a hunch. Miss Carter, it could be him, or it could be someone else entirely, but we're going to keep an eye on him. Discretion. See if he shows any suspicious behavior. 2 days later, Morrison returned. We put surveillance on Daniel Foster. And Emily. It's him. GPS tracking on his car showed he was parked on your street for 5 hours last night. When we confronted him, he initially denied it. Then he admitted he just wanted to make sure you were safe. Not a direct admission of guilt, but enough for a restraining order and probable cause for a more thorough search. A search of his apartment revealed everything. In a locked closet in the bedroom, a secondary computer, full of photos of me. Thousands. Videos too. Some taken from angles that indicated hidden cameras in my own apartment. He had installed tiny devices, button-sized, in various places. Smoke detectors, electrical outlets, even inside my bedside lamp. They also found a journal, notebook after notebook of his thoughts about me, detailed fantasies, plans for our future together, and darker plans to remove obstacles if I continued to resist. Obstacles included Rachel, my family, anyone close to me. Daniel Foster was arrested. Charges: aggravated stalking, invasion of privacy, terrorist threats. Bail denied due to flight risk and danger to the public. I should have felt relieved. I was free. I was safe. But trauma doesn't disappear with an arrest. Every nighttime sound woke me up. Every shadow seemed threatening. Reviewing the hidden cameras that technicians removed from my apartment, 6 in total, made me nauseous. Thinking about how many nights I had slept, showered, changed, cried, existed under the constant surveillance of this obsessed stranger was a violation that would never fully heal. Morrison assured me that Daniel would be fully prosecuted. The evidence was overwhelming, probably years in prison, a permanent restraining order afterward. But on my first night alone in my apartment after the arrest, with all the cameras removed, new locks, updated security systems, I couldn't sleep. I stayed awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling, wondering if it was really over, or if there were others like Daniel, other invisible observers, other obsessives waiting for their moment. The trial was 3 months ago. Daniel Foster was sentenced to 12 years. His defense attorney tried to argue mental illness, nonviolent pathological obsession. The prosecutor presented the threats, the detailed plans, the obvious escalation toward violence. The judge agreed with me. It wasn't simply obsession, it was a prelude to something worse that was only stopped because the police acted in time. During the trial, I had to testify, sit in front of a jury and recount every humiliating detail, the gifts, the phone calls, the photos of me sleeping, showering, the trauma of knowing he had been in my apartment while I slept. I cried on the stand. I didn't want to, but I couldn't help it. Daniel watched me during my testimony, not with anger, with sadness, as if I were the one who had betrayed him, as if his twisted love were legitimate and my rejection were the real injustice. It gave me chills then, and it still does now when I remember his expression. After the verdict, as the officers led him away in handcuffs, he turned and looked at me one last time. His lips formed silent words. "I love you, Emily. Always." Then he disappeared through the courtroom door and, supposedly, out of my life. But the damage was done. I moved out of that apartment 2 weeks after the trial ended. I couldn't stay there. Every corner, every shadow was contaminated with memories of being watched, of being a prisoner in my own space. Now I live in a building with 24-hour security, 7th floor, windows I only open during the day, blackout curtains always closed at dusk, 3 locks on my door, alarm system connected to the police station, tracking app I share with Rachel so she always knows where I am. I still see a therapist weekly, PTSD from stalking he called it, hypervigilance, chronic insomnia, severe anxiety. I take medication now. It helps, but it doesn't erase. I've tried to regain normality. I went back to work, still from home because going out is difficult. I rebuilt relationships with clients, slowly re-establishing my life. But there are dark days, days when the doorbell rings and my heart races, thinking it might be another black package with a red bow. Days when my phone rings from an unknown number and I freeze before answering. Days when I see a man with dark hair and glasses at the supermarket and my nervous system goes into panic mode. Rachel says I need time, that I will heal, that Daniel is in prison and can't hurt me. She's right, technically, but the fear he instilled in me lives independently of his physical location. It's a psychological parasite that I will probably carry for years, maybe decades. What I learned from this experience is that horror isn't always a monster under the bed or a masked killer. Sometimes it's an ordinary-looking person who decides you have something they need, your presence, your attention, your life, and they're willing to take it all without consent, piece by piece, until there's nothing left of you that's truly yours. Daniel Foster stole more than my privacy. He stole my security, my trust in the world, my ability to be alone without fear. He stole the version of me that was naive about invisible dangers. And although I am building a new version, more cautious, stronger in some ways, I will always miss the Emily I used to be. The one who could sleep with the windows open. The one who could walk alone without constantly looking over her shoulder. The one who trusted that if something was wrong, she would feel warning signs before it was too late. But there were no warning signs with Daniel. Just an average man with a friendly smile and a regular coffee order. And that's perhaps the scariest thing of all. Anyone could be a stalker. The polite neighbor, the regular customer, the stranger at the gym who smiles briefly before returning to his workout. There's no way to know who's watching. Who has decided that you are their obsession until it's too late? And now, every day, I live with that knowledge. It's a weight I can't shake. It's a shadow that never completely disappears. It's the cost of having been, for 9 months, the object of someone's sick fantasy. The cost of having been watched, followed, photographed, raped. Not physically, but in every way that matters. It's the cost of surviving Daniel Foster. And even though I survived, part of me will always be trapped in that third-floor apartment, with the curtains closed, a knife under my pillow, waiting for the next black gift with a red bow, waiting for the man in the shadows to finally get tired and leave me alone, waiting for freedom that I never felt completely safe claiming. Because even now, years later, when I close my eyes, I still hear him whisper, "I'm always watching you, Emily. Always." The first time I saw him, I didn't think much of it. The city is full of people who blend into the gray asphalt and the daily rush, fleeting shadows that pass like ghosts in a perpetual fog. But he didn't blend in. He was burned into the back of my retina, a burnt negative that even today, months later, wakes me up in the middle of the night with my heart beating like a war drum. It was just another Tuesday, one of those days that stretch out like old gum until the clock strikes 8 and forces you to rush out the door. I had left late from the bookstore where I work, surrounded by piles of dusty books that promise distant worlds, but only leave me with the smell of old paper impregnated in my clothes. A fine, annoying drizzle clouded the city, turning the sidewalks into slippery mirrors where my boots splashed with a sound that sounded like a muffled sob. I was running toward the bus stop, the hood of my jacket up like a useless shield against the world, when my eyes met his. He was standing motionless, like a statue eroded by time, under the threadbare awning of a hardware store closed for the night. He wasn't sheltering from the rain. The drops beaded on his face without him seeming to notice, as if his skin were made of something more resistant than human flesh. He wasn't doing anything. He was just watching. And that look, God, that look wasn't casual. The kind that brushes against someone for a second and then continues on its distracted way. It was a total, absorbing, devouring gaze, as if he were cataloging each of my features with the precision of a surgeon dissecting a corpse, measuring the exact distance between my eyes, counting the raindrops sliding down my left cheek in a hypnotic rhythm, registering the slight trembling of my lips from the cold. His eyes were the color of dry mud after a storm, opaque and bottomless, and the most disturbing thing was that he didn't blink, not once. His eyelids remained static, as if the act of blinking were a luxury reserved for the living, and he was already beyond that. I instinctively looked away, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the dampness seeping through the collar of my jacket. It was something deeper, a knot in my stomach that twisted like a snake awakening. When I looked back, a bus passed by, grazing me with its metallic roar, splashing me with dirty water, and as my vision cleared between the steam and the blurred lights, he was gone. He had evaporated like smoke, leaving only the echo of that stare fixed on the back of my neck. I forgot about it, or I tried to forget it, attributing it to predate nerves for a date I had that night. A bland guy from Tinder who never amounted to anything, to the suggestion of the rain that always makes me melancholic. But deep down, something in me already knew that it wasn't the end. A week later, the memory crept back into my mind like a splinter under my skin, and then I saw him for the second time. I was at the supermarket, one of those fluorescent dungeons where the air smells of cheap detergent and contained despair, pushing my cart through the pasta section with my mind blank, deciding between spirals or bows as if that trivial choice could define the rest of my day. The cart squeaked with a metallic wail that echoed in the empty aisles at that early hour, and I felt exposed, vulnerable under the lights that buzzed like dying insects. That's when that feeling ran down the back of my neck, an icy tingling, as if someone had run a frozen finger down my spine, the absolute certainty of being watched, dissected, turned into an insect, pinned to a collector's pin. I turned slowly, my heart racing in an erratic pulse, and there he was, at the end of the aisle next to the jars of red sauce that dripped slightly onto their labels. He carried an empty basket hanging from his right hand, his long, bony fingers clutching it with a laxity that seemed feigned. Our eyes met again, and again. He didn't blink. Instead, he smiled. It was a slow, deliberate smile that didn't move a single muscle in his angular, gaunt face. Only his thin, pale lips curved into a straight line that conveyed neither joy nor warmth, but a terrifying stillness, like a crack in a porcelain mask about to break. That smile lingered for seconds that seemed like an eternity, and in that time I could smell him, a subtle, musky scent, like earth turned over after rain mixed with something metallic, like rusty blood. I grabbed the first package of pasta I could find, a jumble of spirals that slipped from my trembling hands, and I almost ran away, feeling his gaze piercing my back like an icy dagger sinking inch by inch. The aisle seemed to lengthen, the shelves closing in around me like the jaws of a trap, and when I reached the checkout, my hands were sweating so much that the money stuck to my fingers. I paid quickly, went outside where the morning sun blinded me, and only then did I allow myself to look back. He wasn't there, but the tingling sensation at the back of my neck didn't go away. That's when the real ordeal began, the beginning of the end of my normal life, because it was no longer a coincidence, a chance meeting of eyes in a city of millions. He began to appear, always at a safe distance, always motionless like a petrified shadow, always staring with that intensity that made me feel naked, exposed to the bone. In the park where I usually read on Sundays, sitting on my favorite bench under the 100-year-old oak tree, I found him on a bench opposite, his hands clasped on his knees, his eyes fixed on me over the edge of a newspaper he wasn't reading, in front of the window of the cafe where I meet my friends for trivial chats about work and failed relationships, standing on the sidewalk across the street, silhouetted against the traffic like a cardboard cutout. Once, in the laundry room of my building, at 3 a.m, because insomnia had devoured me yet another night, washing sheets soaked, in cold sweat. The door opened with a squeak that made my skin crawl, and it was him. He entered unhurriedly, placed his empty basket in the machine next to mine. Empty, always empty, as if his presence alone were enough to contaminate the space, and sat down on the cracked plastic bench. He didn't bring any clothes to wash. He just sat down and looked at me, while the machine spun my sheets with a monotonous rhythm that blended with the frantic beating of my heart, a buzzing that vibrated in my ribs like a swarm of wasps. I could hear her breathing, slow and deep, a counterpoint to my stifled gasping, and in the reflection of the fogged-up window, I saw her eyes scanning my silhouette, the arch of my bent back, the curve of my hip against the washing machine drum, as if she were measuring volumes, calculating areas. I bolted, leaving the laundry inside, the soap spilling into a white puddle that looked like innocent semen, and ran up the stairs 2 at a time, the keys trembling in my hand until I managed to lock the door with 3 turns of the bolt. That night, I dreamed of his muddy eyes. I dreamed that they followed me in the darkness of my room, floating like independent orbs, blinking in unison with my own terrified eyelids. I began to change my routines like a paranoid, mapping out alternative routes home in my mind, avoiding the main streets in favor of side alleys that smelled of urine and fermented garbage. I went shopping at a more distant supermarket, one on the outskirts where the neon flashed like a dying pulse, but even there, in the wilted fruit section, I felt that twinge in the back of my neck. I stopped going to the park, giving up my Sunday's reading under the sun filtered through the leaves, and instead locked myself in the house with the curtains drawn, the outside world reduced to a strip of dusty light on the floor. But he always found a way, like a virus that mutates to evade the immune system. It was as if he had a GPS of my life, a radar that detected my movements before I planned them, and each encounter eroded me a little more, leaving cracks in my facade of normality. I began to doubt my sanity, to look at myself in the bathroom mirror and wonder if I was making it all up, if my anxiety, that beast that has always lurked at the edges of my mind since my mother's death, wasn't weaving illusions to keep me on edge. I told my best friend, Alba, one night on her frayed sofa with a glass of red wine that tasted like iron on my tongue. She looked at me with that gentle pity reserved for the fragile, her brown eyes full of concern, and told me that he was probably just a weird guy, one of the many who swarm around the city like rats in the sewers, and that I should ignore him. "Don't give him power, Luna. If you don't fear him, he can't do anything to you," she whispered, squeezing my hand with a warmth that made me cry silently. It was well-intentioned advice, naive in its simplicity, because fear is not a choice. It's not a switch you turn off with willpower. It's a visceral, animal response, a primal instinct that ignites in the face of an invisible but palpable threat. And I, deep in my gut, felt that this man was a threat incarnate, a predator who sniffed my terror like an aphrodisiac. The harassment took a qualitative leap one gray late autumn afternoon when I was returning from work with the weight of a day of impatient customers and unpaid bills in my bag. I had taken the trash down to the dumpster in the back alley of my building, a poorly lit place that always made me nervous, with its graffiti-covered walls oozing moisture and shadows moving like ghostly fingers. The dumpster was overflowing, the stench of rot rising to my nose like an accusing finger, and as I tied the bag with clumsy knots, the sound of my own footsteps in the puddle amplified in the oppressive silence. When I turned around, he was there, blocking the exit with his tall, gaunt figure, silhouetted against the dim light of the distant street lamp. There was no one else in the alley. The world seemed to have stopped, the distant traffic a surreal murmur. The distance between us was barely 5 meters, close enough for me to see the details of his face with nauseating clarity. Sallow skin furrowed with fine wrinkles, like cracks in dry clay. A small scar on his left temple that glistened in the dampness like a fresh wound. The enlarged pores of his aquiline nose, and above all his eyes. That hungry fixed gaze that devoured me alive, registering the rapid pulse in my jugular, the slight tremor of my knees under my jeans. He didn't say a word. His silence was more eloquent than any scream, a void that sucked the air from my lungs. He just took a small object out of his pocket, held it for a moment between his fingers, long with short, clean nails almost feminine, and dropped it to the ground with a metallic clink that echoed like a sentence. Then he turned and walked away, with exasperating calm, his footsteps echoing in the alley like the ticking of a broken clock, leaving behind a trail of that musky scent that I now associated with pure panic. I stood frozen, my heart pounding in my chest so hard I thought it would break my ribs, cold sweat soaking my blouse under my arms. Minutes passed, or were they eternal seconds, until I caught my breath, and then I tremblingly approached the object on the floor, my sneakers splashing in a puddle that reflected my distorted face. It was a key, an old key, with large, irregular teeth made of rusty brass that weighed more than I expected when I picked it up, cold and heavy in my palm like a foreign beating heart. It didn't open any locks in my house. I tried it that same night, my hands shaking uncontrollably, but its presence was a message, a symbol laden with sinister promises that coiled around my mind like poison ivy. A new chill ran through me, one that started at the base of my spine and radiated to my fingertips, and for the first time the fear was tinged with something darker, an unhealthy curiosity, a morbid fascination that I was ashamed to admit, as if touching that key had infected me with its perverse essence. That night, locked in my apartment with the new key on the door, an additional lock I had bought in a panic that same afternoon, my fingers cutting themselves on the plastic packaging, I sat on the kitchen floor, surrounded by the darkness seeping through the cracks in the curtains, and cried. I cried out of fear, a stifled cry that left my throat raw, out of anger at myself for being so vulnerable, so fragile in a world that devours the weak, out of helplessness because my home, my refuge of cracked walls and inherited furniture, was no longer safe. He had crossed the threshold, not physically, not yet, but mentally, settling into the corners of my psyche like a parasite feeding on my thoughts. He had sat down at the table of my mind, with that quiet smile and his unchanging eyes, and he had no intention of leaving. The key lay on the kitchen table, illuminated by the dim light of a hanging bulb, and seemed to glow with a sinister light of its own, as if it absorbed the darkness and regurgitated it in hypnotic pulses. I stared at it, equally mesmerized and horrified, imagining what door it would open, what secrets it would unearth, and in that trance, the world was reduced to that object. Its jagged teeth like fangs, its weight like an invisible chain around my neck. And then, the phone rang. It wasn't my cell phone, vibrating in my pocket with mundane notifications. It was the landline, an old, dusty device I only used to call my grandmother on Sundays, its cord coiled like a dead snake on the counter. The ringtone sounded shrill, breaking the silence of the night like a knife tearing through silk, a sound that made me jump off the floor with a gasp. No one called that number. It was a relic disconnected from the digital world, an echo of times past. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times, each beep a hammer blow to my skull, until the answering machine kicked in with a mechanical click. My voice came on, recorded years ago, in a carefree tone that now sounded foreign to me, saying, "I can't take your call right now. Please leave a message after the beep." There was silence on the other end of the line, a heavy void that spread like toxic fog, broken only by the calm breathing of a person, slow, measured, like the bellows of an old organ. Then, a voice I will never forget, one that still whispers in my nightmares like a rejected lover. It was deep, serene, with a raspy quality like sandpaper rubbed on raw wood, and in every syllable there was a perverse intimacy, as if whispering in a lover's ear in the dark. 7, it said, pausing on the number as if savoring it, as if each digit were a forbidden caress. 7 steps to your door, Luna. I've counted them. The line cut out with a sharp click, leaving only the buzz of the dial tone, an electronic wail that merged with the roar in my ears. I froze, the air frozen in my lungs like liquid lead, the world tilting in a vertigo that made me lean on the counter to keep from falling. 7 steps. It was true, a truth that pierced my soul. The staircase at the entrance to my building, the private one that led only to my door and that of my absent neighbor, had exactly 7 steps, counted 1,000 times on sleepless nights, each one a step toward the illusory safety of my home, something that only someone who had been there would know, who had climbed those steps in the stillness of the night, who had touched the splintered wood with eager fingers. He wasn't just following me like a wolf in the shadows. He had been in my territory. He had mapped it out. He had claimed it. And now, for the first time, he had a voice that had spoken my name, Luna, as if it were an obscene prayer, a mantra of possession. The key, now on the table, seemed to throb to the rhythm of my panic, no longer an innocent message, but a promise of total invasion, of doors that would open not only in metal, but in flesh and soul. The game had begun, and I didn't know the rules, only that the board was my life, and the pieces moved with a perverse logic that escaped my understanding. The following days were a downward spiral, a whirlwind of paranoia that consumed me from within like corrosive acid. I began to call him the Geometer in my mind, a name that came to me during one of those sleepless nights, curled up under the sheets with a pillow over my head to drown out the sounds of the city, a distant car horn, the creaking of pipes, which I now interpreted as coded whispers. I christened him thus because of his obsession with details and measurements, the way he looked at me as if I were a theorem to be solved, a Euclidean space to be mapped. His harassment intensified, going from fleeting appearances to subtle interventions that made me question the solidity of my reality. One morning, as I was leaving the house, I found a handwritten note stuck to the bottom of my door, a small piece of paper folded with angular, precise handwriting, like compass strokes. Your shampoo smells like coconut. It's nice. It reminds me of the tropics, of damp skin in the rain. Horror paralyzed me on the threshold, my stomach churning with nausea as I realized that he had been close enough to smell my hair, to inhale my essence in the privacy of my bathroom, perhaps while I slept, oblivious to his spectral presence. How did he know? Had he entered? The thought made me vomit into the sink that very night, the bitter vomit burning my throat as I imagined his fingers brushing against the shampoo bottle, smelling it with a deep, perverse inhalation like an addict sniffing a fetish. It wasn't just surveillance. It was an olfactory tactile intrusion, a prelude to something more invasive. Then came the small changes in my home, details that I initially attributed to my carelessness. A sofa cushion, slightly askew, not at its perfect 90-degree angle as I always left it. A book of poetry from my bookshelf, Plath's Ariel, open to a page about the abyss and closed upside down, as if someone had leafed through it with morbid eagerness. But they were too precise, too intentional, a subtle gaslighting that made me doubt my memory, my perception. "Are you okay, Luna? You seem distracted," Alba said to me on the phone, her voice a distant balm, but I could only stammer excuses about work stress, unable to confess how I woke up sweating, convinced that the creaking in the hallway was him, measuring the space between my bed and the door with silent steps. I went to the police on a rainy afternoon, sitting in a station that smelled of stale coffee and despair, facing a bald officer who scribbled notes on a yellowed form. "It's harassment, officer. He follows me, leaves notes, knows things about my home," I explained, my voice breaking like fine glass. He looked at me with that bureaucratic fatigue, his eyes sunk into eternal dark circles, and sighed. "Without an explicit threat, ma'am, there's not much we can do. Change your number, install cameras. But don't be alarmed, the city is full of crazy people." I left with a copy of the report in my bag, a useless piece of paper that got soaked in the rain and fell apart like my hopes, feeling lonelier than ever, marked prey in a forest of invisible predators. The surveyor knew, of course. I could feel it in the heavy air, in the way his temporary absence became more oppressive, like the silence before a storm that promises lightning in your veins. The harassment moved to the digital world a week later, a realm I thought was safe, my sanctuary of superficial likes and distracting memes. I woke up to my phone vibrating on the nightstand, an insistent buzzing that pulled me out of a feverish dream where his eyes floated in a black void. Emails from fake accounts, addresses like admiradordeluzionanimo.com or geometriaeternashadow.net filled my inbox with a constant ding that made my skin crawl. When I opened the first one, there was a photo of me taken from a distance. Me in the park weeks ago, with my head bent over my book, the wind ruffling my hair, but the angle was intimate, as if the photographer had been inches away, capturing not only my image but also the slight blush on my cheeks from the sun. "Your silhouette against the light is a perfect theorem," the subject line read, and in the body of the email, a detailed description. "The curve of your neck when you read, 23 centimeters from your collarbone to your earlobe. The pulse in your jugular vein quickens to 92 beats per minute under my gaze." I threw up again, this time in the bathroom, leaning over the toilet as tears mixed with acid. The horror not only in the violation of my privacy, but in the scientific precision of his obsession, as if I were a specimen in a petri dish, dissected for his intellectual and carnal pleasure. My social media was hacked that same night. I woke up to notifications exploding on my screen, friends asking if I was okay. A status posted from my account. "The stillness of an empty house has its own music. Soon I will hear it up close, Luna. Your sighs will be my symphony." I frantically deleted it, blocking accounts, changing passwords with fingers tangled on the keyboard. But the damage was done. Alba called me hysterically, "Luna, what the hell is that? Are you in danger?" And I could only sob, finally admitting the magnitude of my terror, how I felt surrounded, besieged on all fronts, physical, mental, digital, like an island eroded by relentless waves. I slept with my phone in my hand, the volume turned up to the max in case an alert sounded, but at night, when the silence became thick, I imagined his raspy voice reciting data. The length of my skirt that day, 48 centimeters. The scent of my perfume mixed with the sweat of fear, a fragrance he collected in imaginary bottles. The morbid fascination seeped into my nightmares. Dreams where his gaze became an ethereal touch, invisible fingers tracing lines on my skin, measuring the elasticity of my flesh, and I would wake up gasping, the sheets tangled around my thighs like bonds, my body betraying me with a guilty heat that I hated. The first physical contact came like a bolt from the blue on a Friday afternoon when the sun was sinking into a purple twilight that stained the streets with diluted blood. I saw him from the bookstore window, his unmistakable figure across the street, motionless under a streetlight that flickered like a dying eye. Something broke inside me then, a dam of panic giving way to blind rage, and I rushed out into the street without thinking, my heart a fist in my chest. "Hey, you!" I shouted, my voice breaking in the heavy air, crossing the road with traffic honking around me like a chorus of demons. He doesn't run away. He stays there, his hands in the pockets of his worn coat, his head tilted in an almost scientific curiosity. I approach him, breathless, and confront him. "What do you want from me? Why won't you leave me alone?" His answer is polite, cold as the edge of a knife. "I just admire your geometry, Luna. The way you move, the space you occupy in the world. It's perfect. A living axiom." His voice is the same as on the call, raspy and serene, and in person it's worse, because it's accompanied by his warm breath brushing my face. A breath that smells of mint and something rotten underneath. He reaches out his hand, and before I can back away, he grabs my left wrist with brutal force, his fingers like iron pincers sinking into my flesh. "Your watch is crooked," he murmurs, adjusting it with deliberate slowness, his thumb pressing on the spot where my pulse beats, feeling, I know he feels it, the wild gallop of my blood. It is a brief contact, barely 10 seconds, but invasive in its intimacy. His skin against mine, rough and hot, measuring not only time but the texture of my veins, the heat radiating from my terror. It leaves a bruise in the exact shape of his fingers, 4 oval marks and a curved thumb, a purple stigma that I look at in the mirror that night, tracing it with trembling fingers, feeling the echo of his touch like a burn, spreading across my arm, across my torso, across my entire being. I flee from there, sobbing, the traffic a blur, and at home I lock myself in the shower, the scalding water washing my skin until it is reddened, but not the ghost of his grip. That tactile possession that makes me feel sullied, dirty on a level that soap cannot reach. The bruise blooms like a poisonous flower, and every time I see it, I remember his still smile, the way his eyes didn't blink once, absorbing my panic like nectar. The ritual of invasion began insidiously, a whisper in the architecture of my home that made me obsess over every corner. One night, after hours of checking closets and cracks in the plaster with a flashlight trembling in my hand, I found the camera. It was hidden in the smoke detector in the living room, a tiny black eye camouflaged in the white plastic, its lens pointing directly at my sofa, where I spent my afternoons curled up with a book or a glass of wine to drown out the emptiness. Horror struck me like a sledgehammer. He had seen me there, in my moments of vulnerability, perhaps carelessly changing clothes, or crying silently with my knees against my chest, or touching myself in the solitude of the night to remind myself that I was still human. Kneeling on the floor, screwdriver in hand, I felt an abysmal vertigo, the world tilting as I imagined his nights in front of a screen, playing my movements on loop, pausing at the moment my blouse slid off my shoulder, measuring the arch of my spine with a virtual ruler. I didn't deactivate it immediately. In a bold and deranged twist that still embarrasses me, I decided to use it against him. I began to act for the camera, a dangerous game of double standards where I feigned normality. I dressed with deliberate slowness, letting the fabric brush my skin at calculated angles, or sat on the sofa with my legs crossed, reading aloud passages from books about revenge and shadows, my voice a seductive bait. It was pure masochism, a mutual morbid fascination where I returned his invisible gaze, imagining his excitement on the other side, his hand adjusting the zoom to capture the glisten of sweat on my collarbone. But the underlying horror did not dissipate. Each performance left me exhausted, trembling in the darkness afterward, wondering if I was feeding the monster, if my false bravado was just another layer of submission. I slept little, haunted by dreams where the camera came to life, its eye blinking like his, and I danced for him on a stage of exposed flesh, my movements dictated by invisible measurements. The package arrived on a Tuesday morning, deposited at my door like a pagan offering, wrapped in brown craft paper tied with string that smelled of his musky scent. I found it when I left for work, my heart stopping in a dull thud, and dragged it inside with oven mitts as if it were a bomb about to explode. Inside was a diary, bound in worn black leather, with yellowed pages covered in his angular handwriting. It was his diary, but no. As I leafed through it with profusely sweating hands, I recognized the dates, the events, my life, narrated from his obsessive perspective. Day 14. Moon at the supermarket. Choose spirals, not bows. Her fingers brush the package with a delicacy of 2.3 seconds. Her exposed, vulnerable neck invites measurement. The descriptions escalated in perversion, not only physical but analytical, of terror. Her sweat in the rain, salty and warm, evaporates at 37.2 degrees. I collected in my mind a fragrance of fear that hardens my pulse. He spoke of my skin with detailed obscenity. The texture of her inner thigh, estimated at 1.8 millimeters of elasticity, contracts under stress like taut silk, and of his imagined experiments, how my body would respond to precise touches, erogenous maps traced with pen on the pages, diagrams where I was a geometric body, lines and curves labeled with equations that promised forced ecstasy. The climactic act, he confessed, was not crude rape, but total possession of my will, the moment when my fear would transmute into voluntary submission, my terror into a sexual offering that he would consume like a pagan god. I read until dawn, mesmerized and repulsed. The diary open on my lap like a cursed grimoire, and on the final pages, a note. Soon, Luna, I will measure the dilation of your pupils under my touch. It will be symmetrical. Perfect. Horror washed over me in waves, a tsunami that left me in tatters, masturbating in a guilty frenzy that night as I imagined his voice dictating the measurements, hating myself for the treacherous pleasure that sprang from the abyss. The trap closed on a stormy night when the thunder rumbled like the roar of his inner laughter, and a message arrived in my hacked email. Go to Warehouse 7B in the abandoned industrial park. If you don't go, I'll send the camera recordings to all your contacts. Your nighttime moans will be made public. Cornered, my pulse pounding in my temples like an execution drum, I went. The industrial park was a concrete graveyard, skeleton buildings with broken windows howling in the wind, and Warehouse 7B lay in the bowels of darkness, its door ajar like a hungry mouth. He was waiting for me inside, illuminated by a flashlight that cast shadows as long as outstretched fingers, his silhouette silhouetted against piles of moldy boxes that smelled of mildew and neglect. There was no greeting, just his steady gaze and a tape measure hanging from his belt like a medieval flail. You came, he said, his raspy voice a purr of satisfaction. Undress, Luna, for the measurement. The scene unfolded in unbearable tension, the air thick with the ozone of the storm and the stench of my own terror. He didn't use physical force at first. His threats were scalpels. Imagine Alba watching you touch yourself thinking of me, or your boss, calculating your geometry during work breaks. Trembling, tears streaming down my face like salty rivers, I removed my clothes piece by piece, the jacket falling with a dull thud, the unbuttoned blouse revealing my white lace bra, the jeans sliding down my hips in slow humiliation. Naked before him, my skin bristling in the damp cold, I felt reduced to flesh, to an object of study. And he approached with measured steps, the tape measure uncoiling like a snake. He photographed me first, blinding flashes burning my retina, capturing the blush of shame on my breasts, the curve of my trembling hips, then the measurements. Total height, 1.67 meters, he murmured, running the tape around my body with clinical touches charged with perverse electricity, his hot breath on my shoulder as he wrote in his crumpled notebook. Bust circumference, 8.8 centimeters. Contracts 2 millimeters under stress. His fingers brushed my skin at precise points, the inside of my thigh, where the vein beats exposed, the hollow of my navel, measuring the depression with a fingernail that scraped lightly. My nipples, hardened not by desire but by panic, thermal reactivity of 1.2 degrees in 5 seconds. He forced me to kneel on the grainy ground, the gravel biting into my knees, and measured the length of my arched spine, his hand pressing the base of my spine to study the flexion, a touch that lingered into an invasive caress, his fingers exploring the curve of my buttocks with an academic concentration that was pure perversion. Your moisture, Luna, that of fear, not pleasure, measures 0.4 milliliters in the inguinal fold, he whispered, smelling his fingers afterward. His eyes closed in ecstasy, and I disconnected then, my mind floating above my violated body. A cruel experiment, where I was the lab animal, dissected alive for his thesis of domination. There was no physical penetration, but the abuse was total, a systematic violation of my autonomy. Each measurement a nail in my soul, each note in his diary a trophy of my humiliation. When he was done, he left me there, curled up on the floor with my clothes scattered like the remains of an offering, and left with a "until the next symmetry," his silhouette dissolving into the rain that pounded the roof like angry tears. I dressed in the darkness, my body a map of bruises and phantom scrapes, and walked home in a trance of dissociation, the thunder drowning out my sobs, knowing that something in me had died that night, replaced by a crack that oozed black rage. After the trauma, something broke inside me like a splintered bone, an internal snap that reverberated in my empty chest. Fear, that constant companion, transmuted into a cold, dark rage, a poison seeping into my veins and driving me to act. I no longer wanted to run away, to curl up in the shadows. I wanted to destroy him, to tear the skin of his control off him as he had tried to tear mine off. I knew the system wouldn't protect me. The police, with their forms and size, were a paper wall, so I began to investigate him myself, using the clues he, in his perverse arrogance, had given me. The old key, cold and heavy in my pocket, like a cursed talisman. The diary, with its obsessive notes that I now reread like a hunting manual. I spent sleepless nights in front of the computer, my eyes burning under the blue light, searching for patterns in his descriptions. A fleeting mention of a midnight train, a scribble of a station in the margin of a page. The bruise on my wrist faded, but I traced it daily, a tactile reminder of his touch. And in that scar, my resolve was born, to strip him of his anonymity, to expose his broken geometry to the world. Alba reluctantly helped me with searches on obscure forums and contacts in cybersecurity, her voice trembling on the phone. "Luna, this is dangerous. Let it go." But I couldn't. The abuse had branded me like a hot iron, And in my dreams, I was no longer the passive victim, but the one who measured his fear, calculating the exact angle for his fall. The key, tested on imaginary locks, opened a locker at the train station one foggy dawn, the metal creaking like a lament as it turned. Inside, a treasure trove of horrors, photos of other women, faded Polaroids in yellowed envelopes, anonymous silhouettes with notes on the back, discarded geometry, asymmetry in panic, 4.7 seconds until break. I wasn't the first, just the one who had lasted the longest, the one who had resisted his measurements to the point of total immersion. Among the photos, an address scribbled on a card, an apartment on the outskirts, a block as gray as her soul. The discovery left me euphoric and nauseous, vomiting in the station bathrooms, while the images of those women, their hollow eyes, their postures of surrender, overlapped my reflection in the dirty mirror. I broke into his lair 2 nights later, the key to my own apartment serving as a makeshift pick in the simple lock of his door, my heart a hammer in my throat. The place was a sanctuary to his obsession with me, cold and minimalist, obsessively tidy like a dissection lab, white walls without pictures, angular metal furniture reflecting the dim light of a lone lamp. The air stagnant with that musky scent that now made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. In the living room, a dedicated wall, large format photos of me pinned with rusty tacks, diagrams superimposed with red lines tracing the curves of my body, the arch of my back, the distance between my navel and pubis, equations scribbled in the margins promising balance in forced ecstasy. Her bedroom was worse, an altar of perversions, glass jars with locks of my stolen hair, from my brush, from my pillow, objects of mine stolen during her invasions, a lost earring, a torn stocking with a stain of menstrual blood that made me cover my mouth to keep from screaming. Diaries piled on the nightstand, pages open to recent entries. Luna's dilation in the warehouse, 7 millimeters, perfect for theoretical insertion. Her crying, 14% higher pitched under the tape. But I also discovered his vulnerability, a crack in the armor of his control, crumpled letters to an absent father, confessions of a measured and discarded child. I am not symmetrical. I am not perfect. A self-hatred projected onto his domination over us. The geometries he molded to fill his void. I moved around the apartment like a vengeful ghost, photographing everything with my trembling phone, the flash illuminating horrors like flashes of memory, a drawer with measuring tape stained with something viscous, a laptop open to a video from my hidden camera, paused at the moment he touched me in the shower, my face contorted in guilty pleasure. Horror washed over me again, but this time tinged with power. He was no god, just a pathetic man, a collector of shadows that I was now dismantling. He arrived shortly after, the door opening with a click that froze my blood, his silhouette filling the doorway like a sentence. He didn't scream, he didn't attack. He just stood there, his muddy eyes fixed on me with a mixture of surprise and unhealthy delight. "You have broken the symmetry, Luna," he said, his raspy voice a hoarse whisper, closing the door with deliberate slowness. The confrontation was not physical, not at first, but a duel of words in the darkness of his lair, the lamp flickering like a faulty heart. He cornered me against the wall of photos, his body inches away, the heat of his proximity a nauseating reminder of the warehouse. But I didn't back down. Instead, I took the diary out of my bag and opened it to the page about his broken childhood. I'm not perfect, am I? Measured and discarded by your father. That's why you measure us, isn't it? To feel big in our smallness. His eyes fluttered for the first time, a real vulnerable flutter, and I saw the break. The mask falling, revealing the small man underneath, the child who counted steps so he wouldn't cry. You... How? He stammered, his hand reaching out not to strike but to touch, a pleading gesture that I pushed away with contempt. I see you now, I spat, my voice a sharp edge sharpened by pent-up rage. "You're pathetic. Your measurements aren't power, they're fear. You measure because you can't possess. But I no longer fear you. I loathe you." The duel escalated, words like darts. I described his jars as trophies of a eunuch, his diagrams as masturbation on paper, and with each syllable his posture sank, his shoulders slumping like broken wings. He tried to regain control, approaching with that still smile, his fingers brushing my arm in an echo of the past bruise, murmuring, "We can be symmetrical, Luna. You and me, a shared theorem." But I pushed him away, my palm against his chest, feeling the erratic beat beneath. And in that instant, the power reversed. He was the insect now, pinned beneath my gaze. The room filled with his ragged breathing, the air thick with the smell of sweat, his sweat, not mine. And in a fit of self-defense and pent-up rage, I attacked him. Not with a weapon, with the tape measure from his drawer, wrapping it around his neck in an improvised noose as he struggled, his body surprisingly fragile beneath mine. "Measure this," I gasped, pulling with blind force, his eyes wide, not with anger, but with pure terror, mirroring mine in the warehouse. He struggled, his nails scratching my arms in bloody grooves, but I didn't let go, the world shrinking to the gurgling of his throat, to the shared pulse that was dying out. When she stopped moving, her limp body sliding to the floor like a severed puppet, I stood there, gasping, the loose tape in my bloodied hands, the final silence a deafening void. I tied him up with his own ropes, locked him in his bedroom closet, his sanctuary turned tomb, and left with his diary under my arm, the old key now in my pocket like an inverted trophy. The police never found me. I wiped away the fingerprints, burned the photos in a distant dumpster, and the world kept turning, assuming the surveyor had disappeared into the shadows of the city. But I know the truth. I visit him in my dreams, his raspy voice whispering measurements from the closet, and sometimes, in the quiet of my apartment, now reinforced with triple locks, I look at the key and understand that he and I are echoes of each other. I have won, but at a monstrous cost. The hunter has become the guardian, and at night, when I count the 7 steps to my door, I don't know if the fear I feel is hers or mine. The game is not over. It has only changed form, and in its broken symmetry, I find a dark morbidity that binds me to it forever. I never thought something as small as a notification could be so scary. At first, it was just a sound, the soft ping of the phone on the nightstand in the middle of a random January morning. I had left my phone charging next to the bed, something I always do. I work from home as a freelance graphic designer, so I spend half the day online. It wasn't unusual for a client to get confused about time zones and send messages at odd hours. I squinted at the screen. Unknown number. 1 message. "You look tired. You should get more sleep." There was no profile picture, there was no name. I thought it was spam or a mistaken message. I replied with a simple, "Who are you?" There was no response. I deleted the conversation, turned my phone face down, and went back to sleep, although I couldn't quite fall asleep. It was a minor detail, something not worth mentioning to anyone. At that moment, the fear hadn't started yet. The next day, the message came back. "That blue blouse looks good on you." I froze. I was in the kitchen pouring myself coffee. I was wearing a navy blue blouse, one I hardly ever wore. I ran to the window. I live in an apartment complex on the outskirts of Portland, Oregon. Nothing special. Gray buildings, shared parking, trees bare for winter. Outside, I saw no one. I thought maybe it was a neighbor, a guy with a twisted sense of humor. I answered, "Who are you? This isn't funny." It took 3 minutes before the reply came. "I thought you didn't like coffee so bitter. You used to put sugar in it." I dropped my phone. No one knew that. No one except someone who was watching me, observing me from somewhere. That morning, I closed the curtains, even the ones in the bathroom. I went to work, a shared studio in the city center, trying not to look back. For hours, I tried to concentrate on my designs, but every vibration of my phone made me jump. That night, I told my best friend Emily. She laughed, although I could tell it wasn't a completely genuine laugh. "It's probably some kind of joke," she said. "Someone who got your number from a database. But he knows things. The blouse, the coffee. Phones hear everything. It's probably targeted advertising or some kind of bot." I tried to convince myself of that it was technology, not a person. But the next day's message was different. "The guy in the studio is looking at you too much. Don't smile back at him." That day, I had run into Kyle, one of the new designers at the co-working space. He had said hello, and I had barely smiled out of courtesy. How could anyone know that? I went back to the apartment early. I checked every corner, the drawers, under the bed, the closet. Nothing. I began to notice small noises that I had previously ignored. The creaking of the building, the ticking of the heater, the wind against the windows. They all sounded like footsteps, like someone holding their breath. That night, I slept with my cell phone turned off. The next morning, when I turned it on, there was a single message, with no timestamp and no visible sender. "Don't turn off your phone. I like to hear you breathe." I don't remember crying so much since I was a child. The following days were a mixture of fear and denial. I didn't want to call the police yet. I had no evidence. There were no direct threats, no name, no face. Just phrases that seemed to come from my own private life, as if someone had ripped them out of my everyday life to torture me with them. I started taking different routes to work, changed my schedule, stopped going to the gym. Sometimes I thought I saw a dark car parked in front of my building, but never the same model twice. One night, when I came home, I found a folded letter under the door. There was no sender or stamp, just a white sheet of paper written in black ink in neat handwriting. "I don't understand why you hide so much. I don't want to hurt you. I want you to understand. No one really sees you, but I do. I see what others ignore. I see your sadness when you think no one is watching. I know you better than you know yourself." The handwriting was so steady, so clean, that it scared me more than if it had been shaky. It was the fear of someone methodical, patient, someone who took the time to plan. I called the police that night. The officer who came was nice, but I could see in his eyes that he thought I was hysterical. He looked at the letter, had me fill out a report, took photos, and finally said, "There's not much we can do without evidence of threats or property damage. Block the number. If it happens again, let us know." I blocked the number. The next day, I got a new message. "Don't ignore me. It's not the same number, see? It's useless." Despair was eating away at me. I started sleeping with a kitchen knife on my nightstand. I dreamed that someone was opening the door, breathing on me while I pretended to be asleep. I dreamed of footsteps, of shadows, and every time I woke up, my phone was glowing with a new message. "You woke up again at 3:17. You cried in the shower today. Fear doesn't suit you." I tried to move out. I called my landlord, but the lease was for a year, and I had only been there 3 months. The penalty for canceling it was very high. I asked a friend to come stay with me for a few days, but even then, the messages kept coming. "Your friend snores a lot. It bothers me." The message arrived at 2:04 a.m. My friend was sleeping on the couch. I got up trembling and searched the hallway with a flashlight. In the window of the building across the street, I thought I saw a light go out. It was the first time I had a possible address for my fear. I called Emily the next day. I told her everything. She told me to come stay at her place for a few days, not to be alone. I agreed. I packed quickly without looking back, but before I left, I found something on the floor in the hallway just outside my door. A lock of my own hair, tied with a red ribbon. That's when I stopped thinking it was all remote surveillance. Someone had been inside. That was the night my desperation turned into total paranoia. In the car, on the way to Emily's house, I felt like I was being followed. I checked the rearview mirror every minute, When I arrived, she was waiting for me with a blanket and hot tea. I hugged her and cried so hard I couldn't speak for several minutes. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept with the curtains open. I wanted to see outside, the neighborhood lights, anything that would remind me that the world was still out there. But at 3:20, my cell phone vibrated. The message read, "I like how you look in that house. The light suits you." Emily let me stay at her house as long as I wanted. It was a quiet area, a residential neighborhood on the outskirts of Beaverton, with low houses and quiet streets lined with trees. She lived alone with her cat and told me I would be safer there. I wanted to believe her. The first few days were a kind of truce. There were no messages, no calls, no letters. I felt like I could breathe again. I spent the day on the couch, watching TV shows without paying attention, trying to ignore the permanent knot in my stomach. Emily made me hot meals and insisted we go for walks, but I could barely set foot outside without looking back. Everything changed on the third day. That morning, Emily went to work and left me alone. At noon, while I was heating soup in the microwave, the home phone rang. It was a landline, the kind almost no one uses anymore. I hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello?" Silence. For a second I thought it was a mistake, a wrong number. But then I heard breathing, slow, deep, as if someone wanted to make sure I knew they were there. "Who is this?" I said, trying to sound firm. There was no answer. Just that breathing until it stopped. I put down the receiver and leaned on the counter. My hands were shaking so much that the bowl of soup fell to the floor. I forced myself to breathe. "It can't be him," I repeated to myself. "He can't know I'm here." Minutes later, my cell phone vibrated, an unknown number, a message. Too bad about the plate. It was a nice one. I felt a knot in my stomach, a mixture of anger and fear that made me cry with helplessness. I checked the windows, closed, the curtains drawn. The landline phone was still on the counter, silent, but it seemed to be watching me. That night, when Emily came home, I told her everything. She didn't want to doubt me, but I saw that spark of disbelief in her eyes, the same look the police officer had had. "Maybe someone is playing a cruel joke on you," she said. "It could be someone from work. Have you talked to Kyle lately?" "No," I replied immediately, perhaps too quickly. "He has nothing to do with it." But her comment haunted me all night. I remembered how Kyle had approached me weeks ago, how he offered to help me with a project, how he insisted on having coffee outside the studio. I'd said no, and he laughed, as if he hadn't taken it seriously. What if it was him? The next morning, I checked the security cameras Emily had at the entrance to the house, connected to her cell phone. Everything looked normal, except for one detail. At 2:47 a.m., a blurry figure was seen walking down the sidewalk in front of the house. It didn't stop. It didn't look at the camera. It just walked by. But the way it turned its head slightly, the slow pace of its steps, made my blood run cold. That night, I received another message. "Your friend is a good person. She doesn't deserve to suffer for your mistakes." I tried calling the number, but it always went straight to voicemail. I blocked it. Minutes later, another message came from a different number. "Blocking me won't save you. Why do you keep trying to escape?" I felt like prey, and he, whoever he was, enjoyed my every move. I began to notice that every time I went out, there was a different car parked on the corner. I didn't know if it was the same driver, or if I was just getting paranoid, but I got to the point of writing down license plate numbers in a notebook. One night, Emily suggested I go to the police again. I begged her not to. I was afraid it would make him angrier. "This is what he wants," I told her, "to scare me, to paralyze me." "He's already doing that," she replied, and she was right. We tried to stick to our routine, but a week later, Emily received an envelope in her mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single photo, me sleeping on her couch. When she showed it to me, I almost threw up from the shock. I didn't remember her taking that photo. "It wasn't me," she said, her voice trembling. "I swear." We went to the police together. This time, they took the matter more seriously. They took the photo and the envelope and promised to investigate. A detective, a man in his 50s, asked me to tell him everything from the beginning. I did, through my tears. He listened silently and finally said, "It's possible that he accessed your devices. It sounds like a case of cyberstalking with physical surveillance. We're going to trace the numbers, but it takes time." Time. That word devastated me. How much more could I take? The nights became endless. Emily slept with a bat next to her bed. I slept with a knife under my pillow. But the worst part wasn't the messages or even the photo. The worst part was the waiting, knowing that something could happen at any moment, that the next knock on the door could be him. One day while Emily was at work, I decided to go for a walk. I needed some air, even though my legs were shaking. I walked to a small cafe 2 blocks away. I ordered a tea and sat by the window. I tried to convince myself that he was just a sick man, that he would soon be caught. Then the waiter came over and left a note next to my cup. "A customer asked me to give this to you," he said, pointing to the bar. I looked, but there was no one I recognized. The note said, "You look calmer today. It's nice to see you outside again." I ran out. I didn't even pay. That night, Emily insisted on calling the detective. We told him about the coffee shop. He promised to come by the next day to install a tracker on the phone and check the house, but he didn't arrive on time. At 3 in the morning, a metallic noise woke me up. It was coming from the kitchen. I lay still, holding my breath. Then I heard footsteps. Slow, shuffling footsteps. The creaking of the floor under someone's weight. I woke Emily up, covered her mouth before she could speak, and whispered, "There's someone downstairs." We stayed still, listening. The footsteps stopped, then silence. Seconds passed that felt like hours. Emily grabbed the bat. I dialed 911 on my cell phone, ready to call. Then a voice came from downstairs, a calm, almost sweet voice. "You don't have to hide. I just want to talk." I dropped the phone. It was his voice. I'd never heard it before, but I knew it was him. I recognized it in the tone, in the calmness, in that sickening confidence that only someone who knows they are in control can have. Emily looked at me with wide eyes. We didn't say anything. The sound of footsteps returned, closer. He was coming up the stairs. I was shaking. Emily raised the bat, but the lights in the hallway suddenly went out. Total darkness. Then, a sharp sound. Something fell to the floor. "Emily," I shouted, and turned on the flashlight on my cell phone. There was no one there. Neither Emily nor him. Just the bat lying on the first step. I ran downstairs. The front door was open. The cold air rushed in. Emily was outside on the lawn, crying. "He ran out," she stammered. I couldn't see his face. We called the police. They arrived in minutes and searched the entire house. There were no fingerprints, no marks, no broken cameras. Nothing. Just the forced door and a strange smell in the air like wet metal. The detective arrived shortly after. He asked me if I remembered anything else. I said no, that I had only heard his voice. "What exactly did he say?" he asked. "I just want to talk." The detective sighed. "That complicates things. It's not a direct threat." I wanted to yell at him, but the words wouldn't come out. We didn't sleep that night. Emily wanted to leave the next day to move in with her sister for a while. I didn't know what to do. I was tired, so tired that part of me just wanted it all to end, any way it took. At 5 in the morning, as the sky began to lighten, a message arrived. This time from an anonymous email address. "You get it now. No one can take care of you like I can." After that night, time lost its structure. I don't remember if it was days or weeks that I spent at Emily's house, without going out, without talking, waiting for something that never came. The police were still investigating. That was the word they used, investigating. But there was no progress, no suspects. Emily insisted on accompanying me everywhere, but every time she left, to go shopping, to work, to the mailbox, I felt that emptiness, that void behind me, as if the room were breathing. I had begun to hear faint sounds, the click of the router, a barely audible hum behind the wall. I convinced myself that I had cameras, microphones, something hidden. One morning, I went to the bathroom and noticed something that made me freeze. The mirror, fogged up from the shower steam, showed a word written with a finger. Hello. I screamed. I called Emily. But when she arrived, the mirror was already clean. I swore I hadn't imagined it. But in her eyes, I saw that glimmer of doubt, that distance. I was starting to lose credibility even with her. That night, I waited for her to fall asleep. I turned off the lights and with a flashlight checked every outlet, every lamp, every corner. I found nothing, but the act itself calmed me a little, as if searching made me feel like I still had control over something. At 3 a.m, a new message arrived. No need to search. I'm closer than you think. I sat in the dark, cell phone in hand, listening to my own heartbeat. The only thing I could hear was the wind, and for a moment I could have sworn I heard footsteps outside. I got up slowly and pulled the curtain back an inch. On the sidewalk, under the streetlight, there was a motionless silhouette. It didn't move. It didn't do anything. It was just there. I woke Emily up, but when she came back with me, there was no one there. You have to go to the police again, she said, this time in a tense, tired voice. This can't go on. And what are they going to do? I replied. Say I'm crazy? She looked at me, and for the first time I thought maybe she believed it. A few days later, Emily received a job offer in another city. She asked me to go with her. I refused. I didn't want to drag my fear to another place or depend on anyone else. She left on a Monday morning. She hugged me tightly before she left and told me she would call every day. The silence that followed was unbearable. For the first 2 days, I was on high alert. I checked the phone, the windows, the locks. Then I just got tired. I had spent so much time waiting for something that I stopped fearing it. I went out less, talked to no one. My messages to Emily became shorter, my replies automatic, until one afternoon when I came back from the supermarket, I found a box in front of the door. There was no return address. At first, I thought it was a misdelivery. It was an ordinary brown box with tape on it, but the name, written in black marker, was mine. I went inside, locked the door, and left it on the table. I stared at it for several minutes before deciding to open it. Inside was a single item, a glass jar with a rolled-up note. The note read, "The air in your room. I like its smell." I stood still. The jar was closed, and inside there was nothing, just air. But the simple fact that someone had collected it from my room turned my stomach. I ran to the room and looked for any signs of entry, a forced window, anything. Nothing. Everything was intact. That night, I slept on the floor with the lights on. The next morning, I went to the police again. The detective listened to me, but without the same interest. "There's no crime," he said wearily. "There are no threats, no evidence of physical harm." They gave me a pamphlet with digital safety tips: change passwords, avoid social media, install cameras. I did all that. I changed my number, closed my accounts, as I bought a new phone, one I had never used before. For a week, nothing happened. No messages, no calls. For the first time in months, I slept well. I began to believe it was over. Until one afternoon, while standing in line at a coffee shop, someone behind me said in a low voice, almost whispering, "That haircut suits you much better." I turned around, but there were only normal people, unfamiliar faces. No one was looking in my direction. I left the place trembling. When I got to the car, my phone vibrated. "I told you changing your number wouldn't work." Since then, things have been mixed up. I don't know when I slept or when I ate. I felt that he no longer needed to watch me. He was inside my head. Every sound, every glance from a stranger, every shadow made me think it was him. I started writing to him. Yes, writing to him myself. He replied to my messages. At first with insults, then with pleas, and later with phrases that I don't even remember writing. "What do you want from me?" "Just for you to see me." "I see you. I see you now." When the detective came to check on me, he saw the conversations and looked at me with concern. He suggested professional help. He said it carefully, like someone afraid of breaking something that was already on the verge of breaking. The following week, I started therapy. I didn't want to do it, but I had no other choice. The psychologist's name was Dr. Hayes, and her office was in an old brick building in the city center. She was kind, with a calm voice. She talked to me about trauma, vigilance, anxiety. She told me that my mind might be distorting my perception of events, that maybe the harassment had ended and I was still reliving it. For a while, I believed her. We talked for hours. I cried, I screamed, and she listened without moving, taking notes. She told me I was making progress. Until one afternoon, while I was talking about the box with the jar, I noticed something. On the doctor's desk was a small glass object, a jar, almost identical. She kept writing, not noticing how I was looking at it. Or maybe she did notice. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yes," I lied. I just thought that jar looked familiar. "Oh, that," she said, smiling. "It's an air freshener." But when I left, I knew it was the same one. Since then, I've been back every week. I'm not sure why. Maybe because I want to believe that someone can help me. Maybe because I need someone to listen to my story. Sometimes, when I speak, she nods before I finish my sentence, as if she already knows what I'm going to say. Sometimes she asks me very specific questions. And once, while looking for something on her desk, I saw a folder with my name on it. It was full of papers, printed photographs. I didn't dare ask her about it. Last night, I dreamed she was standing next to my bed watching me sleep. When I woke up, there was a new message on my phone. "The therapy is working. You slept more peacefully today." I wasn't sleeping. Not at night or during the day. The minutes melted like wax on a clock without hands, and my body lived in a state of constant alert. Every sound, every thud on the walls of the building, every ring of the phone made me jump. I had changed the locks twice. I bought cameras, alarms, even adopted a dog, a Labrador named Toby, thinking his presence would make me feel less alone. It didn't work. Nothing worked. The calls started again from different numbers. Sometimes there was no one on the other end. Other times, the silence was replaced by a held breath. One night, I heard a barely audible whisper. "Are you asleep, Emma?" It wasn't just a random name, it was mine. I hung up immediately, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't breathe. I looked at the dog. He was standing upright, staring at the window. He was growling softly, his hackles raised. I approached slowly and opened the curtain a little. In front of the building, parked in the middle of the street, was a dark car with its lights off. The engine was running. I couldn't see anyone inside. I didn't call the police. I'd done that before. And the last time, the officer told me in a tired voice that, without solid evidence, there wasn't much they could do. Evidence, as if fear needed official documents to exist. The next day, I decided to skip work. My boss had given me several warnings for my absences, but I didn't care anymore. I closed all the blinds, disconnected the landline, and curled up on the couch with Toby, a blanket covering us both. In the middle of the afternoon, someone knocked on the door. It wasn't a normal knock. It was a series of soft, almost polite taps. My whole body tensed. Toby began to bark furiously. I remained motionless, holding my breath. The taps repeated. "Emma?" A calm, familiar male voice. "I'm Dr. Klein. I came to see how you were doing." I froze. I didn't remember giving him my address. "I know you told me you didn't want to continue the sessions," he continued in a friendly tone. "But I'm worried about you. I just want to make sure you're okay." I didn't answer. I didn't move. Toby growled incessantly. "You don't have to open the door," he added. "I can stay here and talk to you from the hallway if that makes you feel more comfortable." I slowly backed into the kitchen, grabbed my cell phone, and dialed 911. When I looked through the peephole, the hallway was empty. For the next few days, I didn't leave the house. I slept on the floor with the lights on. I checked the cameras every hour. In one of the recordings, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A man in a long coat walking down the hallway of the building. He stopped in front of my door, bent down, and placed something underneath it. I ran to look. It was a white envelope with no return address. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a photograph. It was a picture of me, taken from my kitchen window. I had my back to the camera, pouring coffee, my hair messy. On the back, a single sentence written in black ink. "Don't close the curtains. I like to watch you." I called the police again. When they arrived, the man was gone, and the camera that had captured the recording was black. "Technical glitch," they said. "It could be a hacker or a bad connection." One of the officers, a young man, tried to reassure me. "It's probably someone who knows you, an ex, a neighbor, but there are no signs of a break-in. Stay calm. Stay calm." They repeated it so many times that those words became an insult. 2 weeks later, I quit my job and packed my things. I moved to another state, to a small town in Indiana. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I changed my phone number, my car, my email address. For a while it worked. Silence was my only relief. Until one morning, when I opened the door to take out the trash, I found a package sitting next to the doormat. It had no return address, no stamp, no label. Inside was a small rag doll made from old clothes, and around its neck, tied with red string, was a piece of paper. "I knew you liked handmade things." I broke down. I threw the doll on the floor and burned it with alcohol in the sink. But as it burned, I realized that something inside the doll was wrapped in cloth. It was a small key. I didn't touch it. I left it there, blackened by the fire. From then on, every corner of my new home became a minefield. Every sound, every shadow was a threat. I started talking to Toby in a low voice, as if someone could hear me. I began to distrust the neighbors, the mailman, the guy who rode by on his bike every afternoon. I lived locked up. I showered with the door open, slept with the lamp on. One day, however, something different happened. I was checking the cameras when I noticed movement in the living room. The front door was closed. The windows were locked. But on the sofa, on the cushion where Toby used to sleep, there was a white flower. A gardenia. That night I cried for hours. I didn't know if he had come in or if he had left it there earlier, but I understood that it didn't matter. He always found a way. Weeks later, an unknown number called me. "Do you like your new house?" said the voice. It was him. I knew it instantly. I hung up. I threw the phone on the floor. It rang again. "Don't hang up," he ordered, now more serious. "I'm not angry. I just want to talk." I didn't answer. "If you only knew how much I watch you," he continued. "Not to hurt you, but to understand you. You don't know how beautiful you are when you're scared." The phone fell from my hands. Since then, every night, I hear footsteps in the hallway. Toby barks, I tremble. But I don't call the police anymore. There's nothing left to say. Sometimes, I think he's waiting for me to let him in, to complete the cycle. Other nights, I find myself staring at my own reflection in the mirror, searching my features for the shadow of his gaze. There are moments when I think I hear him inside my head, telling me to open the door, to let him talk to me. And other times, I convince myself that maybe there never was anyone, that it was all a figment of my tired mind. But then another envelope arrives, another flower, another message, and I know he's still there. I don't know how much longer I can take it. All I know is that somehow he's already inside.